Leave me alone now. Good evening and welcome to Baiju's Exam Prep IAS. Am I audible and visible? Good evening, Brajneet, Rajib, Tehseen. Good evening, all of you. Am I audible and visible? Yeah, good. Thank you. Okay, let some more people join in and then I'll begin. 2-3 minute delay because I got caught in traffic. I'm sorry for that. Yeah, I'm doing well. Thank you, Divya. Harshit Malia, good evening. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you, Divya. Not now, Bimre. Maybe at the end of the session, you can ask because this is a world history class. So therefore, um, you can always mail me, Bimre. You can always mail me if you have any doubt. PPTs are sufficient. Then what is the need of reading books? Yeshi, I'll tell you, there are many things which the PPTs might not contain. This is for clarity and also psychological satisfaction that you have read the subject broadly. So I'm just suggesting one book. Please pick up that book and read the relevant topics. Right? Yeah. My email is vijay.kumar@byju's.com. VIJY Vijay.kumar, all small letters, @byju's.com. Okay. Now let's begin. Let's begin. Yesterday I gave you an introduction to world history. And we discussed a few topics under this topic called Prelude to World History. I discussed Renaissance, I discussed geographical discoveries, Reformation, Counter-Reformation, and Enlightenment. Then I came to the first chapter in your syllabus, that is American Revolution. So let me quickly recall or recap or whatever I have done yesterday regarding American Revolution. So here in 1492, Christopher Columbus discovers America. In trying to discover a North Sea route to India, he wanted to find a westerly route around the or across the Atlantic Ocean to India, and he accidentally discovered America, and that is where the history of America begins from the year 1492, October the 12th. Christopher Columbus's voyage was financed by the Spanish monarch, and therefore Christopher Columbus claimed Central and South America for Spain. So Spain came to colonize Latin America, or what is called Central and South America. And later you have other Europeans going to the Americas. The French were the next to follow, but the French went to the northern parts of America, and they brought certain areas in northern parts of America under their control. And then the third to go to the Americas were the British, right? So on your screen, the capture of Constantinople in 1453 by the Ottoman Turkish Sultan, which triggered off the geographical discoveries. He blocked all the three routes towards the Orient or the East, and the Europeans then decided to found an all-sea route to India and the Orient, and that triggered off or set going the geographical discoveries as such. Um, and of course, Vasco da Gama landed in India in 1498. And just before that, in 1492, Christopher Columbus discovered America. So this was on exactly October the 12th, 1492. October the 12th, 1492, he accidentally discovered America. His ships lost course and he landed in one of the islands in the Bahamas, what he called as San Salvador. So he landed here and he thought he had reached the farthest corners of Asia. And I told you later, an Italian navigator called Amerigo Vespucci further explored this area which had been discovered by Columbus, and Amerigo Vespucci gave a new name to it. He called it as the New World. In fact, it is said that Amerigo Vespucci had discovered this area 1 year before Columbus, and that is the reason why the Americas have been named after Amerigo Vespucci. And of course, Waltz Muller, a German geographer, called this continent as Americas after Amerigo Vespucci. So Christopher Columbus discovers America, and he colonized Spain. Spain colonized Latin America, Central and South America, and these are the chief Spanish colonies in Latin America: Mexico, Peru, and Florida. We have seen this. We have located these places: Mexico, Florida, and Peru. These are the chief Spanish colonies in Latin America. So then the next to follow suit, next to go to the Americas, were the French, and the French went to the northern parts of America. And these are the various territories which they brought under their control: Hudson Bay Territory, Louisiana, St. Lawrence River region, Quebec, etc. So the French colonized northern parts of America. And the third to go to the Americas were the British. And the British, so you can see on your screen, these are the French colonies in the northern parts of America. And then we have the British, who established 13 colonies on the east coast of North America, what is called the Eastern Atlantic Seaboard. This was on the east coast of North America, of the Atlantic Ocean. And you can see on your screen here, these are the 13 colonies, from New Hampshire in the north to Georgia in the south. New Hampshire in the north to Georgia in the south. 13 colonies were established by the British. So what are these 13 colonies? New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Maine, Maryland, Virginia, New Jersey, Connecticut, etc., up to Georgia. Right? Now, what was the distance between England and the 13 colonies? 5,000 kilometers of Atlantic Ocean. As you can see on your screen, 5,000 kilometers of Atlantic Ocean separated England from her 13 colonies. And sitting so far away across the Atlantic, England used to remote control her colonies, or control her colonies. Right. So I stopped here yesterday. Can I continue from here? How can I develop interest in history? I'll talk about these things later, Divya. Okay. So let me focus on the chapter. Mehtab, please suggest me method to make notes of these lectures. Everything is not important, Mehtab. You listen to the lecture and then go back and read a textbook, right? The such textbook I have suggested, and then and repeatedly, at least 2-3 times, you listen to the recorded versions of this class. Then things become very, very clear. And then you read a textbook. Then what happens is, whatever knowledge you have gained, that gets concretized. Whatever doubts you would have had, that gets clarified when you read a textbook as such. That's the only way to do it, right? And whatever material I have created for you, it is in the form of points. So almost 80-90% of the information is contained in the PPTs. Just to plug in the loopholes, you read one textbook, and okay, that should be sufficient. Only the relevant chapters which we'll be discussing in the class, that should be sufficient. And how to make notes, go on YouTube. You have some videos, 10-15 minutes videos, how to make notes, how to make effective notes, how to study smartly or effectively. Such things are there on YouTube. So you take some time out and listen to those videos and try to incorporate those study techniques, revision techniques, note taking techniques from those videos. Did you understand? Now we'll come back here. So let me continue. So here, the first to go to the Americas were the Spanish. So Spain colonized Central and South America, or what is called Latin America. Then we have the French, who went to the northern parts of America, and they brought certain territories of North America under their control. And the third to go to the Americas were the British, and they were confined to the eastern Atlantic coast of North America, where they established 13 colonies. Right? Now, understand this. Colonization led to colonial rivalry. Please understand this. Colonization led to colonial rivalry, where you have the English and the French who began to fight amongst themselves. Now, to put things in perspective, let us take the example of India, right? Who were the first to come to India? All of you know this. It's a very simple question. Among the Europeans, who were the first to come to India? Obviously, the Portuguese. The Portuguese were the first to come to India, isn't it? So the Portuguese were the first to come to India, followed by the Dutch. The Dutch came next. Okay, understand this, please. The Dutch came next. You all know, I'm sure. Then the third to come to India were the British. The English came next, followed by the Danes, Denmark, right? And lastly, you have the French who came to India. So these are the 5 Europeans who came to India. Why did they come to India? For trading purpose. They came to trade, right? They mainly came to trade. But then what happened? They began to fight amongst themselves. It was the Dutch who defeated the Portuguese. You see, the Dutch began to fight against the Portuguese, and they weakened the Portuguese, and they snatched away many of the colonies of the Portuguese, like they snatched away Indonesia, they snatched away Sri Lanka, and also they weakened the Portuguese here in India, the Dutch. So the Dutch defeated the Portuguese. Then came the English. The English fought against both the Dutch as well as the French and defeated them both. Right? So the English defeated both the Dutch as well as the French. Right? And they went on to rule this country. And the Danish, people of Denmark, the Danish, they sold away all their possessions to the British and left the shores of India. So the soul and whole European power in India were the Britishers, and they went on to rule this country for more than 200 years. Now the question is, why did these Europeans fight amongst themselves, particularly the English and the French here in India, right? Because all these countries, Portugal, Spain, England, France, Netherlands, they were all guided by an economic philosophy called mercantilism. They were all guided by an economic philosophy called mercantilism. So let us understand what is mercantilism. So obviously, they wanted to establish monopoly in trade. They wanted all the profits for themselves. That's the reason why the Dutch defeated the Portuguese here in India, and then the French defeated the Dutch as well as the English defeated the Dutch as well as the French, and went on to rule this country, because all the profits that way will come to the British, and they don't need to share the profits with anybody. So all these countries were guided by this economic philosophy called mercantilism. So you see here in America also, in the Americas also, you have the French and the British who began to fight amongst themselves. The French were in the northern parts of America, and the English were their neighbors on the east coast of North America. So they began to fight amongst themselves. Now let us try to understand this particular concept called mercantilism. Okay, let us try to understand what is this mercantilism. Now, what is mercantilism? So, very simple. This was an economic philosophy which was in existence from the middle of the 16th century. That is from about 1550 onwards till about the end of the 17th century. 17th century end, or the beginning of the 18th century, right? Till the end of the 17th century. From the middle of the 16th century, this economic philosophy was in existence. Now, what are the various aspects of mercantilism? Number one, uh, this economic philosophy believed that a country should have monopoly in trade. A country should have monopoly in trade. Okay. A country should have monopoly in trade. So if a country has monopoly in trade, all the profits will accrue to that country. It will come to that country alone. That is number one, monopoly in trade. Number two, a country should have more of exports. So countries should export more and have less imports. They should export more and have less imports. So if a country is exporting more, what will happen? More money will come into the country than the country losing money, right? So a country should have more of exports and less of imports. So in other words, it should have a favorable balance of trade. Favorable balance of trade means more of exports, less of imports, so that more money comes into the country. Thirdly, the state or the government. It's a very simple concept. Understand this. State or the government should play a proactive role. The state or the government should play a proactive role in running the economic affairs of the country. Now, under this mercantilism philosophy, it was believed that a country is strong if it has sufficient stock of bullion. Now, what is bullion? Bullion means gold and silver coins. Bullion means gold and silver coins. So, if a country has huge stock of gold and silver coins or bullion, that particular country was considered to be very, very strong and powerful. And this was the whole idea behind mercantilism, that the country should have a huge stockpile of bullion or gold and silver coins. And accordingly, rules were made. A country should have monopoly in trade. It should have more of exports and less of imports. Thirdly, the state or the government should play a proactive role in running the economic affairs of the country. Further, other principles were added to this philosophy of philosophy of mercantilism in course of time, particularly with respect to the Americas. So here it was believed that colonies, understand this, it was believed that colonies exist for the sake of the mother country. Colonies exist for the sake of the mother country. And what was the duty of the colony? The colony had to supply raw materials. Its duty was to supply raw material and act as a market for the finished goods of the mother country. For example, if you take the example of India under the British, Britain had reduced India into a subordinate trading partner. India's duty was to supply raw materials to England, and those raw materials, like for example, raw cotton, raw jute, etc., would be converted into finished products in the factories of England and resold in India and other countries and the other colonies of Britain. So, colonies exist for the sake of the mother country. The duty of the colony is to supply raw materials to the mother country and act as a ready market for the finished goods of the mother country. Am I there with you, all of you? Mother countries, I gave the example of India and England. Okay, so England was ruling over India. So India is a colony and England is the mother country. That is, it is ruling India. So we call the colonizer as a mother country. Did you understand? It is called as the mother country. So this is number 4. Then number 5. Colonies means, it's part of colonization. It's part of colonization where yesterday I told you what is colonialism. Who's this? Shraddhanjali. Shraddhanjali, I told you, where you have one powerful country politically subjugating another country and economically exploiting that country. That aspect is called colonialism. For example, England ruled over India, politically subjugated India, and economically exploited India. And that is called colonialism. And therefore, India became a colony of Britain. Okay, fine. Okay, we'll come back here. So colonies exist for the sake of the mother country. So I have mentioned this here. Nilanjana, I have mentioned that here, right? I have given the example of India and England. So here we move on. So colonies exist for the sake of the mother country, and it should supply raw materials to the mother country and act as a ready market for the finished goods of the mother country. Further, you see here, no goods, understand this please, no goods should be produced, that is grown. No goods should be grown or manufactured or produced in the colony which is already been manufactured in the mother country. I repeat, no crops or no manufactured goods can be grown or produced in the colony which is already being manufactured in the mother country. For example, let's say bicycle, right? Bicycle is already being manufactured in England. Okay, let's take bicycle as a simple example, already been manufactured in England. So therefore, bicycles cannot be manufactured in India, for example, right? Because India was under the control of Britain. So no goods which is already grown or manufactured in the mother country can be grown or manufactured in the colony. Why? What was the reason for this? Because it will lead to competition. It will lead to competition with the local industries of the mother country. Right. Therefore, this was to, in other words, a certain amount of protection. A certain amount of protection was given to the local industries of the mother country. Protection from a possible competition. Did you understand that? Then number 6. Number 6 is Um, goods shall be transported. Goods shall be transported on ships. On ships owned by the mother country. Owned by the mother country. Okay. Or owned by the mother country, and or owned by a colonial born. So he's a Britisher born, or a Britisher, for example, born in the colony. So either he should be a Britisher or he should be a Britisher born in the colony, right? So goods can be transported on ships owned by the mother country or owned by a Britisher born in the colony. So in other words, they cannot use other ships belonging to other countries to transport goods from the colony to the mother country. Did you understand? For example, if the British have to procure raw materials from India, they will be using a British ship, and all the personnel, all the people working on the ship will be Britishers. They'll be born in England or in one of the colonies of England, right? In other words, no other country can transport goods from the colony to the mother country and vice versa. They understand? Did you understand? These are the guiding principles of mercantilism, and almost all the countries such as Spain, Portugal, England, France, Netherlands. These are the early colonizers. They strictly adhere to this philosophy of mercantilism. Ramandeep, I said whatever is already grown in the mother country or manufactured in the mother country cannot be grown or manufactured in the colony. That's what I said. Did you get me? So that the local industries of the mother country get a certain amount of protection. And gave you the example of bicycle. If bicycle is already being manufactured in England, the colonies of England will not be allowed to manufacture bicycles, because that will add to competition of the competition to the bicycle factories located in England. So the factory owners, the bicycle factory owners of England, will sell their bicycles in all the colonies of England and make a lot of profit. Did you understand? This is what it is. So, Nikhil, goods, I said goods shall be transported on ships owned by a Britisher or by a colonial born. He should be either born in England, or the ship owner should be born in England, or he should be born in one of the colonies of England, maybe the 13 colonies in the northern parts of America. He should be born there. So ships can be only owned by them, and goods can be transported only on such ships flying the Union Jack. The English flag, as you know, is called the Union Jack. Did you understand? These are the guiding principles of mercantilism. All of you clear? Can you raise your hands? Third point is the state or the government should play a proactive role in running the economic affairs of the country. Okay. Second point, SM. So a country should have more of exports and less of imports. For example, if England is exporting more goods, what will happen? More money will come into the country. But if England is importing a lot of goods, what will happen? England will lose money. So the whole idea was to accumulate bullion, that the country should accumulate more and more gold and silver coins. So these are some of the important principles of mercantilism. Clear? Fifth and sixth point, I've already explained this. SM. Right. Now we'll move on. Now on your screen. So colonization led to colonial rivalry. You see, you have England and France. Please understand this. England and France are neighbors. If you look at the map of Europe, they are neighbors. And throughout history, they have been rivals. They have been political rivals as well as trade rivals, always fighting against each other. And even in India, they fought. You have the Carnatic Wars, which you study as part of modern India, the Anglo-French conflict in the Carnatic, where the English East India Company fought against the French East India Company, isn't it? Similarly, in Europe, they fought. They fought many wars in Europe. And even in the northern parts of America, they fought because they were neighbors. So throughout history, they have been fighting, except a few wars, like the Crimean War, they fought on the same side. In the First and the Second World Wars, they fought on the same side. Otherwise, they always have been rivals. Now, England and France fought a number of wars in Europe. For example, on your screen, the Spanish Succession War, the Austrian Succession War, and the 7 Years' War. These are some of the wars fought between England and France. Now, you don't need to know the details of these wars. They came to fight in opposing camps. Okay, so you have England and France fighting in all these wars. Spanish Succession War. What is the Spanish Succession War? There were two parties, two people wanting to become the king of Spain. For example, let us say A and B. A wants to become the king of Spain. B also wants to become the king of Spain. A is supported by France. B is supported by England, and both of them fought in the Spanish Succession War. Similarly, Austrian Succession War. So there were two people wanting to become the king of Austria. One person was supported by England, another person by France, and they fought the Austrian Succession War. And similarly, the 7 Years' War, which took place from 1756 to 63. In the 7 Years' War, what happened? In the 7 Years' War, which was fought between England and France, England defeated France. Please understand, England defeated France and snatched away all the colonies of France in the northern parts of America. So England defeated France and conquered all those areas: Canada, Hudson Bay Territory, Louisiana, Quebec, Newfoundland. All those areas were taken away by England from France in the 7 Years' War. And the 7 Years' War came to an end by the Treaty of Paris. It came to an end by the Treaty of Paris in 1763. Right. So the Treaty of Paris sounded the death knell of the French in America. It sounded the death knell of the French in America because they had lost all their territories to England. So when did the Peace of Paris happen? 1763. 20 years later, understand this. So Peace of Paris, which brought the 7 Years' War to an end, happened in 1763. 20 years later, that is in 1783, the Americans had achieved their independence from England. The 13 colonies had achieved their independence from England. And when we talk about the American Revolution, we are referring to this 20-year period. We are referring to this 20-year period between the termination of the 7 Years' War by the Treaty of Paris and the attainment of independence by the Americans in 1783. And this is what is known as our American Revolution, the 20-year gap where many things happened in those 13 colonies, which led the people of the 13 colonies to sever their connections with England. They wanted to break away their connections with England. And this is the story of the American Revolution. Am I there with you, all of you? Clear, all of you? No, this is not in America, Ankita. These are European wars, Anglo-French wars, which happened in various theaters of Europe, right? We have the Spanish Succession War, the Austrian Succession War, the 7 Years' War. So England and France fought all these wars in Europe, right? And then in the 7 Years' War, England went on to win over France. And as a punishment, England snatched away all the territories of France in the northern parts of America. And the 7 Years' War came to an end by the Peace of Paris. Did you understand? Clear, all of you? Pari, have been as simple as possible. Treaty of Paris is the one which brought the 7 Years' War to an end. You don't need to know the details. In the context of American Revolution, know this much, that in the Treaty of Paris, we have England defeating France and snatching away all the French possessions in the northern parts of America. Yeah, Ramandeep. So I told you 20 years after the Treaty of Paris, the 13 colonies had broken free from the control of England. And when we are talking about the American Revolution, we are referring to this 20-year time period between the termination of the 7 Years' War by the Treaty of Paris and the attainment of independence by the Americans in 1783. In these 20 years, a lot of developments happened in the 13 colonies, which led the people of the 13 colonies to break or cut away their connections with the mother country, England. Clear? Did you understand? Now you see here, the Treaty of Paris sealed the fate of France in America. This was the end of the French in America because they had lost all their territories to England. And exactly 20 years later, we have the supremacy of England ending over the 13 colonies. Definitely, Pari, even the Anglo-French conflict here in India was guided by the philosophy of mercantilism, because the whole idea was to establish monopoly in trade and accumulate more and more gold coins, gold and silver coins. So they were also guided by that economic philosophy of mercantilism. Okay, we move on. So you see here, all of you students, whenever I have given you a PPT with a yellow background like this is for these are extra points for the meant for the students. I have explained to you mercantilism in a very simple manner. The details are here. You can go through the details at your leisure, at your convenience. Okay, so whenever there's a yellow background, this is meant for the student, some extra information for clarity purpose. Okay, I move on. So on your screen, you see I have put two maps. To the left of your screen, you have the the French positions and the British positions. You see here, these are the British positions. British were located here in the eastern Atlantic seacoast. These are the British American colonies, and these are the French colonies, isn't it? In orange, these are all the territories of France before the 7 Years' War. And then after the 7 Years' War, by the Treaty of Paris, you see here what happened. All these territories were conquered by England from France. Okay, so the map explains it very beautifully. All the territories of France were snatched away by England. Clear? Now, let us understand why Europeans went to the New World. Why did the Europeans go to the New World? New World is the Americas, North America, South America, Central America. So why Europeans migrated to the New World? Number one, you have wars of genocide going on in various parts of Europe. Wars of genocide. I told you yesterday's class, you have the Catholics, right? Catholics versus Protestants. And other wars were being fought in the continent of Europe. Many people who wanted a peaceful life, they did not want to get involved in these wars. They wanted to have a peaceful life. They ran away to the New World to have a safe and peaceful life. So to escape the wars of genocide going on in Europe, many people from Europe ran away to the New World. This is number one. Number two, you have poor people. You have slavery during those days all over the world, including in Europe. So poor people would be bought by the rich and the influential. The nobles will buy the poor people and force the poor people to fight their wars. Nobles are fighting amongst themselves. So what they will do, they will not themselves fight. They will buy poor people as slaves, and they will train them to fight wars, and they force them to fight their wars. Many of the poor who did not want to get killed in these wars, when they found an opportunity, they ran away to the New World. This is number two. Then number three, you have European immigrants. So from various parts of Europe, people ran away to the New World or escaped to the New World or went to the New World voluntarily for various purposes. Number one, to earn profits. So during those days, you have the Americas, which was a huge continent with hardly any population. So many of these Europeans felt that if they go away to the New World, they can start a business and earn profits. Then to escape political tortures. For example, I told you you have the 30 Years' War, which happened in Europe. Some countries became Protestant and some countries became Catholic. So the king has decided that he wants to follow Catholicism and not Protestantism. So obviously, when the king has decided to become a Protestant, wanted to make his country a Protestant country, the Catholics within his boundary came to be persecuted. So you have religious persecution of the Catholics by the Protestants and vice versa. So many of the people ran away to the New World for religious freedom. They wanted to have religious freedom. They did not want the government or the state to decide their religious affairs. They wanted it to be a personal matter. Then also people wanted to escape political tortures. So let us say the king doesn't like a certain person, or he has punished him. He's likely to punish him because of some crime committed by that person. So many of them escape to the New World to escape political tortures. Right. Then for political reasons also, you have people running away. For example, during the reign of Charles the First of England, we have the Stuarts who met a defeat in the Civil War, and they ran away to the New World. Similarly, during those days, German states, you have German-speaking areas who were ruled by kings like dictators. There were 300 German states, and there were 300 kings, one for each state. And these German kings ruled like dictators. They never cared for the rights and freedoms of their people. And many of the German people, to escape these dictatorial rule of their own kings, ran away to the New World. So all sorts of wonderful people from Europe and other parts of the world ran away to the Americas for religious freedom, to escape political tortures, to earn profits, right? And even for that matter, if somebody is in a debt, understand this: England was experiencing the Industrial Revolution. England had become the workshop of the world. We have a separate topic called Industrial Revolution. We'll talk about it later. So you have the Bank of England, which was established as early as 1694, the Bank of England. And the Bank of England had a lot of branches throughout the country. So a middle class person, if he wanted to start a business, what would he do? He will go to the bank or one of the branches of the Bank of England, and he will borrow money at a very a comfortable rate of interest, very low rate of interest, and he will start a business, right? And he might have kept his house or some jewels as security to borrow that loan. And let's say the business flops, the business doesn't take off, and he has lost the principal as well as he has lost the loan, he has lost the principal, and also the security he has kept. Now he has to repay the loan which he has taken from the bank. Otherwise, what will the bank do? It will take action against him, and that person who is a debtor now can also be punished. He can be imprisoned for life because he has defaulted in repaying the loan he had taken from the bank. Now, and the punishment could be life imprisonment. Till he dies, he may be in prison, or he may even be killed by the government. Therefore, many of the debtors from England ran away to the New World to escape being imprisoned for life. So, for various reasons, we have people going away from Europe to the New World, to the Americas. Did you understand? Now, Stuarts, you have a civil war which was fought, and Stuarts were one class, one group of nobility, right? No, Ramandeep, I told you, America was discovered by Christopher Columbus. So the world came to know, Europe came to know, and later the other parts of the world came to know about Americas. So that's how people from various parts of Europe ran away to the New World. You have the British going there, then the Spanish went first to the Latin America, French went, English went, then you have Germans, Portuguese, French, all of them went away to the New World. Right. Repeat political reasons. Political reasons, I told you, because of political reasons could be, two groups of people fighting for the throne, right? And one group is defeated, and they could be persecuted by the reigning monarch. So they escape political tortures or escape suppression and oppression by the reigning monarch. They ran away to the New World. For example, I have given you an example. In the reign of Charles the First, the Stuarts were defeated in the Civil War, and they ran away to the New World. Okay. Now, please understand, how was life? And you need to understand this part. This is the gist of this topic, American Revolution. So, when was America discovered? 1492, right? And when did the 7 Years' War come to an end? 1763. So, America was discovered in 1492, and 7 Years' War came to an end in 1763. Now, what was the life when America was discovered? How was America like? Right? America was the Wild West. It was full of forest, thick forest, tall grasslands, right? And it was, and the early settlers who went there, we have just now looked at it. People from various parts of Europe went away to the New World. Now, when they went there to the New World, that is to the Americas, they had to fight against nature. They have gone there for various purposes. They have been compelled to go there. Many of them went to earn profit. Many of them went to escape political tortures. Many of them went to for the purpose of religious freedom. Many of them wanted to escape getting imprisoned because they are in debt. They have borrowed a loan and they have defaulted repaying that loan. Right now, how was life in? How was the how was the life in the middle of the 15th century or the end of the 15th century in America? It was like any other part of the world. It was the Wild West. Okay, it was the Wild West. You have thick forests, grasslands, right? And Europeans have gone there from various parts of Europe, and they are trying to make a living there. They have to cut down the forest, they have to cut down the grasslands, and make it fit for agriculture, right? And then you have the attacks of the Red Indians, the local Aboriginals, Red Indians. Though it is derogatory to use the word Red Indians, they were the Aboriginals, the original inhabitants of America. So they will attack these Europeans, right? So the Europeans had to fight off the Red Indians. They had to fight against nature. They've gone there. Let us say somebody gets a fever. He has to withstand the fever. And so hopefully he would want to survive. So it was very, very difficult for the early settlers who had gone there to make a living. right? But then in course of time, over a period of time, in between 1492 and 1763, over a period of time, what happened? They became self-sufficient. They became self-sufficient. Please understand, initially, when they went there, once in 3 months or once in 6 months, a ship would come to the 13 colonies, right? It would come to the 13 colonies, and they will procure the essentials, food, or maybe some essentials like toothpaste or maybe soap, etc., whatever they required. So initially they were dependent on the mother country, but gradually, over a period of time, they became self-sufficient. Whatever they wanted, they began to cultivate crops there. They began to manufacture, okay, whatever they wanted. Then they began to build schools. They established schools, colleges, universities. Many of the people who were born there in the 13 colonies, uh, they uh, they became lawyers, journalists, owners of fishing fleets, bankers, philosophers, politicians, and they were widely traveled. They had traveled Europe, right? So they could also argue with the British politicians on equal terms. So in course of time, the people of the 13 colonies became self-sufficient. They were no more dependent on the mother country, England. And ultimately, they decided to break free from the control of the mother country. This is the gist of this topic called American Revolution. We will discuss this. Now look here on your screen. How was let us look at the nature of the colonies and the colonists. First of all, you see here on your screen, it was Queen Elizabeth of England who encouraged her countrymen to go to the New World. So she began to encourage people of England to go to the New World, that is the Americas. But the actual encouragement was given by King James the First. King James the First, aggressively encouraged his countrymen to go to the New World. And we have two companies, private companies, which were established, the London and Plymouth companies. So he encouraged these two companies, private entities, London and Plymouth companies, to build colonies and start businesses in certain specified regions of the New World, okay, of the Americas. So these two companies were encouraged to build colonies and establish businesses. As a result of the encouragement given by King James the First of England in the year 1607, you see here, in 1607, we have the Jamestown colony, which was established on the banks of the River James in Virginia by the London Company. So the London Company, a private company called the London Company, established the first settlement of the British in the northern parts of America on the eastern Atlantic seacoast. This is the Jamestown colony in 1607, right? This was on the banks of the River James. It was named after King James of England. And this was in Virginia, and this was done by the London Company. And by 1763, that is by the end of the 7 Years' War, there were 25 lakh settlers. 25 lakh people were living, and the British had established in course of time 13 colonies. The first colony was Jamestown colony. Then they added a few more, and totally it became 13 colonies. And from north to south, on your screen you can see these are the 13 colonies. So you see New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia. These are the 13 colonies established by the British by 1763. And how many people were living in these 13 colonies? 90% of them were Britishers. 25 lakh people were living. Totally 25 lakh people were living in the 13 colonies, 25 lakh. From New Hampshire in the north to Georgia in the south. And out of these 25 lakh people, 90% of them are Britishers. 90% of them are Britishers, and the rest 10% belong to other countries. Like they were from Portugal, they were Portuguese, Dutch, French, Germans. The rest 10% were belonging to other countries. Are you there with me? So you see why they gave the name Indian to the native people. See, because Christopher Columbus, I told you, please understand, he mistook that he had reached the farthest corners of Asia, that he had reached where India is very, very close by. So he called those people, he called it as the Indies, and the people of that area came to be called Indians. But then later it was found that it is not India, but a new world. And of course, Vasco da Gama discovered India only in 1498. The Cape route was discovered, a separate route to India. So once the other part of the world came to know that that is not India but a new world, they began to call that as West Indies because it is West, whereas ours is East Indies, right? That's why they came to be called as Indians, right? Compare, no, they're called Red Indians because their color was different compared to we who are brown generally. Okay, are you there with me, all of you? So 90% of them were Britishers and the rest 10 were belonging to other countries. Dikshit, these are the people whose descendants went on to become the Americans. Did you understand? You have the original inhabitants, the aboriginals, who came to be called as the Red Indians. So, and then Europeans, 90% of them Britishers went and settled down there, rest 10% from other countries. And the descendants of these Europeans came to be called as the Americans later in course of time. Okay, yeah, London and Plymouth companies. London and Plymouth companies. These are the two private companies. Okay, now look here on your screen. See here, I told you all sorts of people for various reasons went away to the New World. For example, we have the Puritans. Yesterday's class, the knowledge of yesterday's class comes of use. Who are the Puritans? Puritans are the followers of John Calvin in England, isn't it? Followers of John Calvin in France were called Huguenots, isn't it? So here, Puritans, that is the followers of John Calvin, settled down in Massachusetts. They went away to Massachusetts and made Massachusetts as their home. Then we had the Catholics. Catholics ran away to Maryland and made Maryland as their home. This was in 1532. Remember yesterday's story, Henry the Eighth. You remember Henry the Eighth? I told you his love story in brief. So he fell in love with his queen's maid, and he married her, Anna Boleyn. He marries Anna Boleyn, and he declared England a, a Protestant country. The Anglican Church was born, which was basically a Protestant church. So what happened once England became Protestant country or an Anglican country, the Catholics became a minority in England, and the Catholics came to be persecuted. The Catholics came to be persecuted. So many of the Catholics from England ran away to the New World and they settled down in Maryland and they made Maryland as their home. Right? No, the 13 names of the 13 colonies you don't need to remember, SM. Just to know a few of them. New Hampshire to Georgia. I'll come to that. Okay. Then we have debtors. I told you people had borrowed loans from the banks of England, and let us say they defaulted. The punishment would be imprisonment or maybe even death. So many of these debtors ran away to the New World, and these debtors made Georgia their home. Then we have a sect within Christianity called the Quakers. Who are the Quakers? They are a sect within Christianity. They made Pennsylvania as their home. And then we have a colony, one from the Dutch. So the colonists conquered New York from the Dutch. So that became New York. So these are the various types of people who ran away to the 13 colonies. Now, how was it? How were the 13 colonies? On the northern part, you see, I put a map here on your screen. You see here, we have the northern colonies, the mid colonies, and the southern colonies. So, how was the northern colonies? Basically, people were living in villages, in small villages. They owned small farms, right? And we have frequent attack of the Red Indians. Red Indians, the Aboriginals of America, used to attack them. So these early settlers, the early Europeans who had gone there, had to fight them off and hope to survive in the harsh weather which was there in Americas during those days. Then the southern colonies, they came to have a, over a period of time, they came to develop a plantation economy where slaves used to work. That is, the Europeans used to import slaves from Africa. There was slave trade, so they'll get black Negro slaves from Africa and they'll force them to work on the plantations. So basically, the southern colonies came to develop a plantation economy where you have slavery prevalent. Northern parts you have no slavery, whereas in the southern parts of the 13 colonies you had slavery. Now look here, we have the coming into existence of a hybrid culture, a cosmopolitan culture. So in the 13 colonies which came to existence by 1763, there were 25 lakh people living there in the 13 colonies. They came from different parts of Europe. Okay, they followed different sects of Christianity. They came from different regions of Europe. They followed different sects of Christianity like Catholicism, Calvinism, Anglican Church, Presbyterianism, Huguenots, etc. Swiss Reformed Church, etc. So they follow different sects of Christianity. Then they came to develop different means of livelihood and different forms of government in the 13 colonies. So they developed different forms of government, distinct laws they made. Then they developed different sources of livelihood. But then they faced common problems. All the people living in the 13 colonies, in course, they had common problems. So what did they do? They patched up their differences. Chota mota differences they had, they patched it up, okay, in order to survive and comfortably. And that led to the birth of a hybrid culture or a cosmopolitan culture, which very much resembled the European culture. So people from all parts of Europe have gone there. So they patched up their differences. If somebody is following Catholicism, somebody is following Protestantism, they let it be. So they negated all those things and they came to develop a cosmopolitan culture, live and let live type of a culture, a cosmopolitan culture came into existence in each of those 13 colonies, right? Meshach, I'll come to that. Just hold on. Okay, that's what I'm discussing. That will be discussed at the end of this particular topic. Now, so you see on your screen, we have the northern colonies. Basically, in the north, you have hilly, snowy, unfit for cultivation. That included Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Rhode Island. Mid colonies, you have industries which came to be developed in course of time. They produce mainly wine and sugar. And in the southern colonies like North Carolina, South Carolina, Virginia, you have a plantation economy. They grew tobacco, cotton, sugar cane, and you have slaves working on those plantations. Right? Are you there with me, all of you? Are you there with me, all of you? Clear? So there were 13 colonies which came into existence. The first colony was established in 1607, isn't it? So first colony was established in 1607. And by 1763, there were 13 colonies from north to south, inhabited by 25 lakh people. And out of these 25 lakh people, 90% of them are Britishers, and the rest 10 belong to other parts of Europe. Okay, now look here. In each of these, now let us come understand this. In each of these 13 colonies, there was a state parliament or a state legislature. That's called a colonial assembly. That's called a colonial assembly. For example, let us say the state of Maharashtra, or Karnataka, or Kerala, or Bihar, UP. Each of these states have their own legislature. Okay, so you have each of these states, we have a legislature which is locally elected by the people of that particular state. For example, let us say Maharashtra, the people of Maharashtra have elected their MLAs, right? And the ruling party is, the party which has got the maximum number of votes is the ruling party, and it is ruling over them. And they are the representatives of the people of Maharashtra because the people of Maharashtra have elected them. Similarly, in each of the 13 colonies, we have a state parliament or a state legislature which came into existence. This was the legislative body. This was the legislative body. It was locally elected by the people of that particular colony. For example, let's say Georgia or New Hampshire or Connecticut or North Carolina, South Carolina. They will elect their representatives to the state parliament or state legislature, and that state legislature will make laws for that particular colony. Okay. For example, the state legislature of Georgia will make laws for the state of Georgia. Right. So 13 colonies, 13 state parliaments or state legislature, one for each. Then we have one governor appointed in each of the 13 colonies. So 13 colonies had 13 governors, one for each state. And this governor was the executive authority. He was the executive authority and he was a British appointee. He was nominated by the British government. He was not elected by the people of that particular colony or state. He was a British appointee. And whenever a law was passed by a particular state legislature, the governor of that particular state had to approve or append his signature. He has to sign that law, that particular bill, for it to become a law. Now, generally, the governors created hurdles to these legislatures. They will delay signing, or they will just sit on it. They will not sign at all. right? The only way the state legislatures could control the governor was by controlling his purse. In other words, the governor's salaries were paid by the respective state legislatures. For example, let us say we have the governor of Georgia. Who is going to pay his salary? The state legislature of Georgia. The people of Georgia will pay the salary of that governor of their state. He is appointed by the British government. British government did not pay him salary. Salary was paid by the respective state to which he belonged to, over which he was the governor. Right? That's the only way they could control the governor. But then the governor did not care about the salary too much because he was already a very rich man. He was probably belonging to the royal family or connected to the royal family of England, and he was arrogant, haughty generally. Then, in course of time, you see, you have a town meeting which came to be developed in each of the 13 colonies. So they solve their problems locally. For example, we have a panchayat, isn't it? In every village in India, we have a panchayat. So local affairs of that village will be decided, taken care by the panchayat of that village. And the panchayat is elected by the members of that village. Similarly, you have a town meeting which came into existence in each of the 13 colonies. You have in the towns and cities, people will all meet. You see here, I put a picture of a town meeting going on, and they'll discuss their problem. What is the problem of their town or city? They'll discuss openly and they'll find solutions. They'll try to find solutions as to how to solve the problem. So the people living in the 13 colonies were not dependent on England. They had solved their problems themselves in a town meeting. They elected their local representatives who would make laws for them in the state legislatures or state parliament. The governor was the executive authority who was a British appointee, but then he created hurdles to the state legislatures. Then, in course of time, by the end of the 17th century, newspapers came to be developed in the 13 colonies. Newspapers came into existence. There was a free press, right? And the free press will criticize any law or policy made by the respective state legislatures. So they were free to criticize, and people began to read these newspapers, right? And they developed political awareness. No, and they also came to know what was happening in other parts of Europe. So, what are the newspapers we can talk about? Like, for example, we have the Boston Newsletter. This was the first newspaper which came into existence in the 13 colonies. You have American Mercury, New York Gazette, etc. So you have a free press operating in the 13 colonies. Then we have development of intellectual awareness. Schools came to be established in course of time. Colleges came into existence. Universities came into existence. And then, for example, we have Pennsylvania, the state of Pennsylvania. There, this state became the foremost state in the field of education. So a lot of education was promoted, particularly by the Quakers. Quakers were a sect within Christianity. So under the encouragement of the church, the Quakers established a number of schools, educational institutions, particularly for children. So Pennsylvania became a foremost colony in the field of education. Similarly, we have the Harvard College, which was established in Cambridge City, Massachusetts. So how Harvard College came into existence. We have the William and Mary College, which was established, and the American Philosophical Society, established by Benjamin Franklin. So we have development of education, journalism, that led to the development of a new outlook and germination of the feeling of nationalism. What is nationality? Nationalism, the feeling of love towards one's country. So slowly we have feelings of nationalism developing amongst the people who had been born in the 13 colonies. Now please understand, the early settlers who had gone to the 13 colonies, who had gone to the northern parts of America, had a lot of difficulties. I told you they had to fight against nature, okay, and also against the Red Indians. But in course of time, over a period of more than 200 years, all these developments had taken place. Schools, colleges, other institutions, banks, factories, people became journalists, lawyers, philosophers, scientists, politicians, owners of fishing fleets, owners of plantations. They were widely traveled, they were articulate, educated, and they could also argue with the British politicians on equal terms. So you have a feeling of nationalism developing among the second and the third generation Americans who were born in those 13 colonies. Their grandfather had run away, or their father had run away and come to the Americas. but they were locally born there. They had no touch with England or any of the European countries from where their forefathers had run away or escaped and come. So you have a distinct sense of Americanism, which had developed among the people who had been born there, and their sense of nationality. They began to represent themselves as a distinct people who had been born in the 13 colonies, and they began to love that place, and a feeling of nationalism, that is love towards one's mother country, developed among them. And the education, journalism also promoted that particular feeling. Clear? Then we have a person called Benjamin Franklin. Yeah, you have a person called Benjamin Franklin. Yeah, obviously, all the schools, colleges, universities, they were all, Christian missionaries. Yeah, that is true. And also, many private entrepreneurs established schools, colleges for business purpose. Of course, you have Christianity, which was imparted, because most of them were Europeans and they followed different sects of Christianity, right? Now, we have a person called Thomas Penn. Understand this, please. We have a person called Thomas Penn. He writes a book called Common Sense, a pamphlet. This was basically a pamphlet which he writes. Its name was Common Sense. In that pamphlet called Common Sense, Thomas Penn argued that it would be in the interest of the people of the 13 colonies to cut away their connections, sever their connections with England. People of the 13 colonies should break their connections with England. It would be beneficial for them. That's what he wrote. But then other people did not agree to this particular proposal, or rather, but then that thought was spread by Thomas Penn. And we have, of course, through his speeches, through his writings, he kindled the spirit of nationalism, patriotism, and rationalism amongst the people of the 13 colonies. Then we also have, very active politicians, active leaders like James Otis, Patrick Henry, Samuel Adams. They promoted intellectual awareness. Then in the year 1764, we have a person called Benjamin Franklin, the person on your screen. I put a picture of Benjamin Franklin. Benjamin Franklin called for a colonial congress. He asked all the 13 colonies to meet in a so-called colonial congress. This met at Alabama. Okay, it met at Alabama. And in this colonial congress, where all the 13 colonies were represented, Benjamin Franklin proposed the idea of a federation. He said, why don't we all join together and form a federation? What's a federation? A federation is a voluntary association of states. It's a voluntary association of states. So he said we should all come together and form a federation. But this proposal of Benjamin Franklin was rejected by the other delegates. What you need to understand is each of the 13 colonies had an independent existence. They made their own laws, right? And they lived their own independent existence. There was no coordination, cooperation among the 13 colonies. Not that they were fighting amongst themselves. They pretty much lived a very autonomous and an independent existence, right? So, over a period of time, the people living in the 13 colonies became lovers of parliamentary democracy, that is liberalism. They developed love for liberalism, parliamentary democracy, freedom, and autonomy. But then you have only one matter where the British Parliament made laws, that is the trade laws. And this became a cause of irritation. Britain was sitting 5,000 kilometers away across the Atlantic Ocean on a daily basis. During those days, given the limitations of transport and communication, England couldn't have monitored the 13 colonies on a day-to-day basis. So England did not interfere in the day-to-day affairs of the colonies. It was not possible. Local affairs were taken care by themselves, the people of the 13 colonies. But only in one matter, that is in the matter of trade, it was the British Parliament which made laws and imposed it on the 13 colonies. And this became a cause of irritation. Are you there with me? No, there was no monarchy. I told you it was the Wild West. It was, you have tribals living there. It was a tribal, setting there in Dheeraj. All clear till here? Repeat second and third point. Ankita, what is the second and third point? All clear, right? So you have to be, 1764, Ankita, I said, you have Benjamin Franklin calling for a colonial congress, a meeting of all the 13 colonies. That's called a congress, colonial congress. All the colonies were represented at Alabama. And in that colonial congress, he proposed the idea of a federation. Why don't we all come together and form a federation? But that proposal was rejected. That's what I said. Right? Now we'll move on. Now I told you British Parliament made laws and imposed it on the 13 colonies. So we need to understand what are these trade laws which were made by England and imposed on the people of the 13 colonies. On your screen, British laws to regulate colonial trade. British laws to regulate colonial trade. We have the so-called Navigation Acts. Navigation Acts passed by the British Parliament in 1650, 1651 and 1660. Now look here on your screen. Look at this picture on your screen. This makes things very easy to understand. Now look here. All the goods from the 13 colonies to Europe have to pass through England. You see here? So this is a ship here. So all the goods have to pass from the 13 colonies via England into Europe. These ships will be owned by a Britisher. This ship will be owned by a Britisher or a British born. He'll be a British born in the colony, in the 13 colonies. So you have loading taking place in one of the 13 colonies, and the ship has to pass through England if it has to go to Europe. So the ship will come to England, right? Then the goods will be unloaded. So here the goods will be loaded. Understand this? Somebody wants to sell tobacco. Let us say somebody wants to sell tobacco in Europe. And Virginia is a very famous place in America for tobacco. Famous for tobaccos, Virginia tobacco pipes and all that, tobacco pipes. Now, some Virginia farmer, tobacco farmer from Virginia, let us say, wants to sell his tobacco in Europe. Now, what does he do? He will load all his tobacco onto a ship, a British ship, in one of the 13 colonies. Let us say from Virginia. In Virginia, he loads all the tobacco. And this ship on which he is loading his tobacco consignment has to be owned by a Britisher and manned by Britishers. He should be either born in England, the ship owner, or he should be born in one of the 13 colonies, and he should be inevitably a Britisher. Then what will happen? That ship will reach England, and then you have all the goods unloaded in England. The tobacco is unloaded, then again loaded onto another ship bound for Europe. You see here, I put the picture of another ship. So this is ship number 1, which will bring all the consignment from the 13 colonies to England, and then it will be unloaded and then reloaded onto another ship bound for Europe. The loading, unloading charges has to be borne by the American farmer, the tobacco farmer, right? Then similarly, you have goods from Europe to the 13 colonies. Again, they have to pass through England. So somebody wants to sell something in the 13 colonies. He has to again ship it on British ships. So he'll ship it on a ship. He'll load everything here in Europe. Then it will be unloaded here in England. Then again reloaded on a ship owned by a Britisher. Right? These are the Navigation Acts. This is number 1. Are they with me? Quakers are a form of, it is a sect within Christianity. Nilanjana Das. It's a sect within Christianity, the Quakers. So all the goods have to pass through England on British ships, loaded in one of the 13 colonies, unloaded in England, again reloaded onto another ship bound for Europe. And the same thing happened in the other direction, from Europe to the 13 colonies. The loading, unloading charges, the freight charges, everything have to be met by the local American merchant or farmer. This is number 1. Then number 2, certain goods called enumerated articles. You see, these are the enumerated articles like fur, ship, tar, turpentine, indigo, cotton. All these things have to inevitably pass through England. Compulsory, they have to pass through England. Number 3, if somebody in the 13 colony wants to purchase some foreign goods, let us say for example, France. France is famous for perfume, isn't it? Even now, French perfumes are world famous. So let us say somebody living in the 13 colonies wants to buy French perfume. Either he buy the French perfume in England, or if he buys it from some other foreign country, he has to pay custom duties in England before he brings that French perfume into the 13 colony. This is number 3. I repeat, somebody wants to buy imported goods Either he buy it in England, or if he buys it from some other foreign country, he has to pay custom duties in England before he brings that foreign good into the 13 colonies. Then number 4 is restrictions were placed on colonial industries. A certain amount of protection was given to the local industries of England, right? So protection was given. I gave you the example of bicycle. Let us say bicycle is already been manufactured in England. Nobody in the 13th colony can open a bicycle factory because it will be competition to the bicycle factories of England. So protection was given to the local industries of England. Are you clear till here, all of you? Can you raise your hands? So all the goods to be carried on British ships via England to Europe and vice versa. Loading, unloading charges to be met by the local American farmer or manufacturer, right? Then number 2, and of course those ships have to be owned by a Britisher or by a colonial born. He should be Britisher born in one of the colonies. He cannot be anybody else. Then certain articles called enumerated articles had to compulsory pass through England. Third is, if somebody buys imported goods, either he buy it in England, or if he buys it in some other foreign country, he has to pay a tax, a custom duty in England before he brings that foreign good into the 13th colony. And protection was given to the local industries of England from protection from competition. Further, we have what is called the Iron Act of 1750. This is another law, trade law passed by the British Parliament and imposed on the people of the 13 colonies. Iron Act of 1750. What is this Iron Act of 1750? Let me explain to you. Very simple. It prevented the manufacture of hardware in America. Prevented the manufacture of hardware in America. What is hardware? I'll explain to you. It prevented the manufacture of hardware in the 13 colonies. Let me not use the word America because America is yet to be born. So you cannot have any factory or machinery installed in the 13 colonies. For example, if somebody in the 13 colonies wants to start a bicycle factory, okay, let us say he wants to start a bicycle factory in the 13 colony, he cannot establish a bicycle factory, not allowed. That is according to the Iron Act of 1750. It prevented the manufacture of hardware or machinery. Hardware means machinery in the 13 colonies. This is a trade law. Clear? And then further, we have something called the Molasses Act of 1763, which was imposed on the American distillers. I'm coming to that. Now, let me explain to you what is Molasses Act. Now, before that, let me ask you a question. Among the alcoholic drinks, you have something called rum. Now, how do you get rum? Anybody? How do you get rum? Don't say liquor shop. And how do you extract rum? Now, how do you get rum? Sakshi says jaggery or grapes, that is vodka. No, wheat, somebody says grapes, somebody saying fruits, jaggery, methane. My God. Fermentation process. Okay, Brajneet. Okay, Kartika has got it wrong. Correct. Dikshit and Kartika. Sugar cane. It's a byproduct of sugar cane, right? So you get molasses, from sugar cane, and from molasses, rum is extracted. Famous brand of India, Old Monk. The Old Monk rum is famous, which is used even to make cakes, rum cake. Right now, come back here. Let us come back here. Let us understand what is Molasses Act. I'm trying to explain to you what is Molasses Act. Now, I seek your attention here. Now, a distillation of rum was a very lucrative business. It was a very profitable business or lucrative business in the 13 colonies. So, American rum distillers used to manufacture rum and they used to earn a lot of profits. So rum distillation was a very lucrative business in the 13 colonies. In that context, what were the American distillers doing? They used to carry rum to Africa. Look here, they used to carry rum. They used to carry rum to Africa. This is number 1. You can see the arrow mark here. So they used to carry rum to Africa. And Africa had a lot of, what they'll do is they'll exchange rum for slaves. So young able-bodied men were captured by the slave traders. They'll enter into an agreement with the tribal chief. So you have in the forests of Africa, you have different tribes of different strength. So the slave merchants will get into an agreement with a very powerful tribal chief, and they will give him goodies, rum, manufactured goods, chocolates, etc. They'll give all those things to the tribal chief, and they'll place an order. They'll say, we want 500 young boys, African boys, as slaves. So what will this tribal chief do? He will take his militia and he'll raid into another African tribe, which is weak, and they'll defeat that African tribe, a rival tribe, and they will capture all the young boys, and then they were shipped across the Atlantic into the Americas. Some of them were taken to South America by the Portuguese, to Brazil to work on the sugar plantations. Some of them were taken to Europe directly to work in the mines and also as domestic servants. And some of them were taken to the West Indies, right? And from there to the Americas, to the 13 colonies, or even to the northern parts of America. So slave trade was a booming business during those days. So what the 13 people of the 13 colonies used to do is they used to take rum to Africa, and this rum was exchanged for slaves. So you see here, slaves are brought from Africa to the 13 colonies. Number three is we have these slaves taken to the West Indies. During those days, please understand, what we now call West Indies. Of course, recently we had cricket, 2020 tournament in America and West Indies in the Bahamas. So during those days, some islands of the West Indies were under the British. That's called British West Indies. You see here, British West Indies. Then some islands in the West Indies were under the French. That's called French West Indies. We also have a Spanish West Indies, where some islands of the West Indies were under the control of Spain. Now, I'll again repeat, from the 13 colonies, they should take rum to Africa. That is number one. Then this rum was exchanged for slaves from Africa. They were brought back to the 13 colonies. And from the 13 colonies, they were shipped to the British West Indies. They were taken to the British West Indies, these slaves. And in the British West Indies, the British had plantations, sugarcane plantation, like cotton plantation, etc. They will exchange these slaves for molasses, from which they have to extract rum and bring it to the 13 colonies. Okay, so they'll exchange slaves for molasses. This is number four. And from molasses, they get rum. They'll distill rum, and then they'll bring rum to the 13 colonies. This was the business going on. Are you clear till here, all of you? Can you raise your hands? Clear till here. Okay, now let me continue the story now. Look here. So here, the amount of molasses which was procured from the British West Indies was not enough to keep the American distillers employed throughout the year. So in a year, understand this, in a year there are 12 months, as you all know, right? Now, the amount of molasses which they were able to procure from the British West Indies in exchange for slaves was not enough to keep the American distillers employed throughout the year. Throughout the 12 months in a year, they are not able to get molasses from the British West Indies. Maybe for about 8 months only they are getting molasses. So what would they have to do in the balance of 4 months? Because you don't have enough molasses in the British West Indies, for the rest of the 4 months. So what the American distillers used to do is they used to buy molasses from the French West Indies. Then they will extract rum out of that molasses, and they will ship the rum on other ships. That is, on French ships, they'll bring the molasses to the 13 colonies on French ships or Dutch ships or Spanish ships. Why? Because according to the mercantilist law, goods have to be taken inevitably, compulsorily on a British ship. Now they are buying molasses from the French West Indies, and they cannot carry the rum into the 13 colonies on British ships. Britain will not allow that. Therefore, they used to smuggle rum from the French West Indies on French or Dutch or Spanish ships. Now, the British Parliament, for the balance of a few months, or let us say 4 or 5 months, they are buying molasses from the French West Indies, and they're smuggling molasses on other ships belonging to other countries. Now they wanted to prevent this. What did the British Parliament do? It passes the Molasses Act. You see here, this is the Molasses Act of 1763. Under this Molasses Act of 1763, passed by the British Parliament, American distillers, if they buy molasses from the French West Indies, they have to pay a duty of 6 pence per gallon. They have to pay a penalty of, or duty of, or a tax of 6 pence per gallon. Now, if the American distillers, if they pay that much amount of tax, 6 pence per gallon, it would undercut their profits. It will reduce their profits. So therefore, what the American distillers used to do is they used to buy molasses from the French West Indies, right? They'll extract rum out of it, then they'll ship it across into the 13 colonies on other ships, French, Spanish, or Dutch ships. In other words, they were smuggling rum into the 13 colonies from the French West Indies without having to pay that 6 pence gallon. Right? If they were caught, they would be punished by the British authorities. Still, they took that risk because if they pay 6 pence per gallon duty, it will undercut their profit. Right? And slowly a feeling developed among the American merchants, American rum distillers particularly, who is Britain to make such a law on us and impose it upon us? Who is Britain to impose these trade restrictions upon us? Why is the British Parliament making all these laws upon us? So they became more and more irritated because of these trade laws. These are known as the trade laws or the navigation acts, which were imposed upon the people of the 13 colonies, particularly the merchants of the 13 colonies, by the Parliament of England. Are you there with me? So I'll again repeat this. I'll erase this and again repeat on your screen. You see here, number one is, I told you, rum distillation was a very profitable business in the 13 colonies, distillation of rum. In that context, they used to carry, the American rum distillers used to carry rum to Africa. This is number one, right? And they were traded for slaves. Rum was traded for slaves or exchanged for slaves. And they'll bring slaves from Africa to the 13 colonies. This is number two. Then the slaves were taken directly from the 13 colonies to the British West Indies. This is number three, right? Then the slaves were traded for molasses. They were traded for molasses, and then rum was extracted from molasses and they were brought back. Rum was brought back to the 13 colonies. This was the trade going on. And I told you the amount of molasses which was available in the British West Indies could not keep the American distillers employed throughout the year. They could be employed only for a few months in a year. For the remainder of the months of a year, they will procure molasses from the French West Indies. And they used to extract rum out of it and bring it to the 13 colonies. Now, the British Parliament passed the Molasses Act to prevent the American distillers from buying molasses from the French West Indies. If they buy molasses from the French West Indies, they have to pay a penalty of 6 pence per gallon. But I told you that if they pay that duty of 6 pence per gallon, it would undercut their profit. It will reduce their profit. So what the American distillers used to do is, either way, they used to buy molasses from the French West Indies for the remainder of the year, and then they will extract rum out of it, and then they will smuggle rum on other ships, French, Dutch, or Spanish ships, and they bring it to the 13 colonies. Okay. So in other words, the Molasses Act, though it existed on paper, could not be implemented by the British because the people of the 13 colonies, the American rum distillers, were hoodwinking the British authorities by smuggling rum on other ships into the 13 colonies from the French West Indies. Are you there with me? Clear? I have done this twice. I think you people who have not got it clearly, I'm sure all of you have got it. Have you understood? If not, you go back and listen to the recorded version. You'll get it. Very simple. And this diagram also makes it very simple. Now, you see here, this is the map. So they will carry rum. You can see here, they'll carry rum to Africa and other goods to Africa. Then they'll bring slaves. You see here, slaves are being brought to the 13 colonies, and from there they'll be shipped to the West Indies. That is the British West Indies. Okay, this is the trade. Now, what are the advantages and the disadvantages because of these trade laws? Again, I repeat here, you go back to the map here, to the PPTs, Navigation Acts passed by the British Parliament and imposed upon the 13 colonies. Navigation Acts of 1650, 1651, 1660, all goods to be carried on British ships owned by a Britisher, and it has to inevitably pass through England, goods from the 13 colonies to Europe and vice versa. Right? Loading, unloading charges, freight charges has to be borne by the American merchant or American farmer. Some goods called enumerated articles inevitably have to pass through England. Thirdly, imported goods to be bought in England, if bought from a foreign country, that person who has bought the foreign good has to pay custom duties in England before bringing it to the 13 colonies. Protection was given to the local industries of England from a possible competition. Further, the Iron Act of 1750 prevented the manufacture of hardware in America in the 13 colonies. You cannot establish machinery or hardware in the 13 colonies. Further, Molasses Act of 1763, which was imposed upon the American distillers if they bought molasses from the French West Indies. Did you understand? These are the navigation acts. Now, what are the advantages and disadvantages of these trade laws or navigation acts? Number one, the Royal Army gave protection. So I told you all the goods will be carried on British ships owned by a Britisher, and you have a army or military personnel deployed on those ships. These are merchant ships guarded by British soldiers. So all the goods are taken safely to England and even beyond, for which the trader or merchant or a farmer of the 13 colonies needn't have to pay anything. Okay, so the Royal Army gave protection to the consignment, to the goods on the high seas, from piracy and such things. So you have pirates who might want to loot. They will not take the risk because you have an armed guards, British soldiers deployed on those ships. Okay, this is number one. Number two is it prevented foreign competition. For example, the Virginia tobacco grower enjoyed a virtual monopoly of the British market. The British did not allow anybody else to sell their tobacco in England because you have only Virginia tobacco sold in England. So the Virginia tobacco farmer enjoyed a monopoly of the British market. So it prevented foreign competition in that sense, right? This is number two. Third is, now I told you, I'll again go back here. What is the Iron Act of 1750? I told you, Iron Act of 1750 prevented the manufacture of hardware or machinery in the 13 colonies. And I gave the example of bicycle, right? Bicycle factory, if it is existing in England, you cannot have a bicycle factory manufacturing bicycles in any of the 13 colonies. That is the Iron Act of 1750, isn't it? Now, please understand, I'm going to explain to you another concept called salutary neglect. Let me explain to you what is salutary neglect. What is the meaning of salutary neglect? Under the Iron Act of 1750, no machinery can be manufactured. No machinery can be set up or manufactured in the 13 colonies, right? And I gave the example of a bicycle. Now, the Iron Act of 1750 was flagrantly violated by the people of the 13 colonies. In other words, if a bicycle factory or factories exist in England, bicycle factories were established even in the 13 colonies. Okay, so bicycle factories were established in the 13 colonies, though the Iron Act prevented such a thing, but still they did it. They established a bicycle factory in the 13 colonies. They manufactured bicycles, and bicycles were smuggled into England by the bicycle manufacturers of the 13 colonies. The British government knew about this, that smuggling is happening. Bicycles manufactured in the 13 colonies are being smuggled into England. The British government knew it, but still they neglected it. And what will the British customs officials do? They will take a bribe from the from the bicycle manufacturers of the 13 colonies, and they will allow the bicycles to enter the British market. This is called salutary neglect. The question is, why did the British government allow such a thing to happen? They are the ones who have made this law, Iron Act of 1750, which prevented the manufacture of establishing factories or machinery or hardware in the 13 colonies. But still, they are allowing the smuggling of goods from the 13 colonies into England. Like machineries are allowed into the England, which have been manufactured in the 13 colonies. The reason was, please understand, we have a British Prime Minister called Robert Walpole. I put this here, Robert Walpole. He was the British Prime Minister. Robert Walpole felt that if England treats the 13 colonies as strictly as a colony, then it may pose problems for the British, because you see in the 7 Years' War, England had defeated France, no doubt, and all the territories of the French in the northern parts of America had been taken away by England. But a sizable amount of French lived even now in Canada and New Orleans. In Canada and New Orleans, a huge population of French were still there. Now, the British felt that the French might attack any of the 13 colonies, right? They might create a revolt, they might try to conquer any of the 13 colonies. And if, in case the French attack any of the 13 colonies, they wanted the support of the locals living in the 13 colonies. Therefore, these trade laws were enforced very slackly, they're not very strictly. Laws were there on paper, but it was not enforced very strictly. Because in case the French attacked any of the 13 colonies, the government of England wanted the people of the 13 colonies to support the British and not the French. Did you understand? That is called salutary neglect. Are all of you clear? Did you understand salutary neglect here? The trade laws were not enforced, in other words, strictly. It was enforced in a very lax manner. And that's called salutary neglect. Okay? There is still time for break. Just hold on. So these are the advantages. Royal Army gave protection. It prevented foreign competition. For example, the Virginia tobacco farmer enjoyed a monopoly of the British market. Then the British government encouraged smuggling of goods into England, including machinery manufactured in the 13 colonies. Even though trade laws prevented the manufacture of machinery, they were manufactured in the 13 colonies and smuggled into England. And the British government knew about it. Still, they neglected it. And that is called salutary neglect. Very simple. So here, please understand, the British were afraid of a possible French invasion or French attack from Canada and New Orleans, and they wanted the people of the 13 colonies to give them support, give the British support, not the French, right? And similarly, the people of the 13 colonies, they also wanted the British government, the British army to give them protection. You have a British army stationed in each of the 13 colonies. So the people of the 13 colonies also wanted the English army to give them protection from a possible French attack. Though they were self-sufficient, educated, articulate, and they were no more dependent on England, they allowed these trade laws to be imposed upon them by the British Parliament. And this scenario or this state of affairs continued till 1763. Okay, so both were selfish. In other words, the English are selfish because they want the support of the people of the 13 colonies from a possible French attack, and the people of the 13 colonies also want the British army to give them protection from a possible French attack. Did you understand? And this scenario continued till 1763. Now, what are the disadvantages of these trade laws? I told you, loading and unloading in England. Everything should be brought to England. Then goods are unloaded and again reloaded. The cost of loading, unloading, freight charges has to be paid by the by the manufacturer or the farmer of the 13 colonies. So that increased, that cut away his profits or reduced his profits. This is number one disadvantage. And the second disadvantage is custom duties. You see, I told you, for example, if an American tobacco merchant wants to sell his tobacco in Europe, he has to bring it to England. So the tobacco first comes to England. Okay. Now, who is going to fix the rate of the tobacco grown by the American by the Virginia tobacco farmer? It is not the farmer of Virginia who is going to fix the price of his tobacco. It will be fixed by a middleman sitting in England. And that middleman, an Englishman sitting in England, will fix the price of the tobacco, which has been grown by the Virginia tobacco farmer. So the farmer cannot fix the price of his tobacco. It is done by a middleman. And again, custom duties has to be paid in England for those goods to be going to Europe. So that was another disadvantage which they had to face. So unloading and loading in England and custom duties payable by the American farmer or the American merchant in England before he takes the goods to Europe or before he brings goods from Europe into the 13 colonies. This is the custom duties. These are advantages for the merchant or trader of the 13 colonies. Advantage for that person. Advantages for the merchant or trader, of the 13 colonies, right? So he got protection from the Royal Army. It prevented foreign competition. You have also selected neglect happening. These are all the advantages. And disadvantages again for the American trader or merchant, unloading and loading and custom duties, right? And this state of affairs continued till 1763. Now, I told you what is American Revolution, whatever happened between 1763 and 1783. Whatever happened between 1763 and 83 is called American Revolution, the 20-year period. And we are going to discuss all these 10 points which happened between 1763 to 83, which resulted in the people of the 13 colonies wanting to sever their connections with England, break their connections with England, right? So events leading to the revolution. So I think I will give you a break now. Go for a 10 minutes break. It is 6:40 on my watch. We'll meet at 6:50. We'll meet at 6:50 so that I'll have continuity in finishing of this topic. 6:50, we'll meet. Okay, 10 minutes break. Carry on. Good evening once again. Can we continue? Am I audible and visible? Hello? Right. So let us look at the events that led to the outbreak of the American Revolution. And as I told you, the American Revolution refers to the 20-year period between the end of the 7 Years' War by the Treaty of Paris in 1763 and the attainment of independence formally by the Americans in 1783. And we need to understand what happened during this 20-year period in those 13 colonies, which forced the people of the 13 colonies to sever or cut off their connections with the mother country, England. Number one, Proclamation of 1763. Very simple, understand this. Please understand. What is this Proclamation of 1763? You see on your screen here to the left of your screen, we have already seen this picture, right? 7 Years' War took place. When was this? What was the period of the 7 Years' War? 1756 to 63. 1756 to 63. This is a 7 Years' War. Now, in the 7 Years' War, what happened? England defeated France and she conquered all the territories of the French in the northern parts of America. So this particular map to the left of your screen is the map before the 7 Years' War, and after the 7 Years' War is the map to the right of your screen. So England conquered everything from France in the northern parts of America. Right now, what happened? Once 7 years got a war got over, and England had conquered everything from the French in the northern parts of America, we have the people of the 13 colonies who began to expand west of this line called the Proclamation Line. You can see here this red color line. You see this line here, right to the right. Okay, this is the Appalachian Mountains. You see here, I put another map for our convenience. You see, this is the Appalachian Mountains. They go all the way from Mississippi all the way to Quebec, almost up to Quebec. So that red color line. Now, I have put another map to the right of your screen. So these are the 13 colonies from New Hampshire to Georgia. 13 colonies were there, and that red color line is the Appalachian Mountains. So after the 7 Years' War, what happened is England conquered everything from the French in the northern parts of America, and people living in the 13 colonies began to expand westwards. That is, they began to buy lands across the Appalachian Mountains. That's called expanding westwards. Now, the British government got very wary of this development. Why this British government got scared of this development? Because who are living to the west of the Appalachian Mountains, who are living here, this area, who are living here? Red Indians. Red Indians, the aboriginals of America, were living here. And if the people of the 13 colonies start buying lands here, establishing estates or ranches here, there could be a possibility of Red Indians attacking these people. And there'll be a war between the people of the 13 colonies and Red Indians. And the British government used to consider the people of the 13 colonies as British subjects, British citizens. So it will be the duty of the British government to give protection to the people of the 13 colonies from the attack of the Red Indians. Already in the 7 Years' War, huge amount of wealth, money was spent by the British government in the 7 Years' War. British government did not want any war, any future war with the Red Indians. Therefore, the Parliament of England passed an act. This is called the Proclamation Line of 1763. They literally drew a line, an imaginary line, in other words, preventing the people of the 13 colonies from expanding west of the Appalachian Mountains. And they gave away all those territories from Mississippi to Quebec. All these areas were given away to the Red Indians by the British government. And the people of the 13 colonies became very, very irritated with this. Who is the British government to prevent us from buying lands or settling down in that area, west of the Appalachian Mountains? If the Red Indians attack, it is our problem. Why should the British government prevent us? And they became very angry with the British government. This is number one, Proclamation of 1763. Did you understand? Hello, all of you? All of you, did you understand? See, This is to they are the original inhabitants, of the Americas. And I told you, Christopher Columbus thought he had reached the farthest corners of Asia, right? And he interacted with the local Caribs. The local tribes were called the Caribs. And over a period of time, they came to be called Red Indians because initially it was thought that he had discovered the farthest corners of Asia, in which India is located. And then later, when real India was discovered by Christopher Columbus, that area came to be called West Indies, in opposition to the East Indies, which is Indonesia and other parts, surrounding areas. Right? We are the original Indians. We are brown Indians, has different from those Indians who came to be called Red Indians. Okay, this is the Proclamation of 1763. All of you have understood. Very good. Now we'll come back. Can you conclude this once? Proclamation of 1763. I'll recap whatever I just now told you. In the 7 Years' War, England conquered everything from the French, right? And therefore, the people of the 13 colonies began to expand west of the Appalachian Mountains. They began to expand west of this red color line. That is the Appalachian Mountains. The trails, as it is called, from the south to the north. And that could have resulted in a possible war with the Red Indians. You see here another picture I've put. This farmer here on the screen, you see, British subjects were forbidden from settling west of the Proclamation line. That green color line is called Proclamation line. So this farmer is protesting, I've already bought lands there. How can the British government prevent me from settling down there? So this is called Proclamation line. Did you understand, Garima? So, and all those areas from Elgins, Florida, Mississippi, etc., up to Quebec were given away to the Red Indians, thus preventing the people of the 13 colonies from settling west of that line. This is Proclamation of 1763. Then we come to the second point, removal of French threat. You see here, I've already told you this again. In the 7 Years' War, England defeated France. But then you have a sizable amount of French living in Canada and New Orleans. So here, please understand, the people of the British government did not treat the 13 colonies as a typical colonies. They were not even strictly imposing the trade laws. Why? Because they were afraid of a possible French attack from the north. In the northern parts of America, we have the French living, isn't it? In Quebec, Canada, New Orleans, Louisiana, etc. So France might attack the 13 colonies. And if France attacks the 13 colonies, the British government wanted the people of the 13 colonies to support the British against the French. Okay, not support the French. Therefore, they were imposing the trade laws very laxly, not very strictly. Similarly, the people of the 13 colonies also wanted the British army to give them protection from a possible French attack. So though they had become self-sufficient, they allowed the British colonial rule over them only because they wanted British army to give protection from a possible French attack on any of the 13 colonies. And this scenario continued till 1763. But then what happened in the 7 Years' War? In the 7 Years' War, England defeated France and conquered everything from the French. Now, automatically, the French threat disappeared. France couldn't have attacked anymore, right? The French threat disappeared, right? And therefore, you have the British government had spent a huge amount of money in these wars, not only in the wars which she fought against France in Europe, the Spanish Succession War, Austrian Succession War, etc. Also, in the 7 Years' War, huge amount of money was spent by the British government. Now, after defeating France, you have the British Parliament imposing additional taxes upon the people of the 13 colonies, right? Like, for example, you have the Sugar Act, right? Currency Act, Quartering Act, Stamp Act, Townshend duties. These are extra taxes imposed by the British Parliament on the people of the 13 colonies. And this became a cause of irritation. And of course, you have the removal of French threat. Once France was defeated, there was no possibility of France attacking any of the 13 colonies. And the people of the 13 colonies also did not want Britain to rule over them. This is the meaning of it. And of course, they objected to these extra taxes imposed by the British Parliament on them. Are you there with me? This is removal of French threat. Clear? This is the second point. And I'll explain to you each of these taxes, which the British Parliament imposed on the people of the 13 colonies after the end of the 7 Years' War. Because it had costed them a huge amount of money, they want to recover the cost, improve their financial situation, the British government. And they imposed all these taxes, Sugar Act, Currency Act, Quartering Act, Townshend Duties, Stamp Act, and the people of the 13 colonies objected to this particular aspect. Okay, this is number 2. Now let us understand each of these taxes. Currency Act. So you see, one of the taxes imposed by the British Parliament on the people of the 13 colonies is Currency Act. What is this Currency Act? I've explained this with an yellow background for your convenience, but very simply put, you have shortage of gold and silver coins in the 13 colonies. 13 colonies had very less gold and silver coins. Therefore, you have the people of the the government of the 13 colonies issuing bills of credit. They used to issue bills of credit, giving it the status of a legal tender, legal money. So basically bills of credit is a promissory note, okay, issued by a government on its credit. So because there was a shortage of gold and silver coins in the 13 colonies, the governments of the 13 colonies used to issue bills of credit, giving it the status of a legal tender. The British Parliament prevented the governments of the 13 colonies through this Currency Act from issuing bills of credit. Okay, this is called Currency Act. Did you understand, all of you? So I've explained here, a bill of credit is a promissory note issued by a government on its own credit and intended to circulate as money. It is intended to circulate, right, as money. So this was prevented by the British Parliament, through this Currency Act. So in other words, the governments of the 13 colonies no more further can introduce or issue bills of credit. Okay. I'm coming to that. Nilanjana Das, just hold on. I'm yet to come to Townshend Duties. Just hold on. Let us cross the bridge when we arrive there. Try to be in the moment, please. Currency Act. Are you clear? I've explained Currency Act. Nilanjana, have patience. I'm coming to Townshend Duties. Hold on. Then we have Sugar Act. Now let us go to the third point. Measures of George Grenville. Now, in the course of my lecture, you'll understand what is Sugar Act, what is Currency Act, what is Stamp Act, what is Townshend Duties, etc. So just hold on. These are all the taxes imposed by the British government after the 7 Years' War and imposed it upon the people of the 13 colonies. Now, let us understand Sugar Act. Now, who was this George Grenville? George Grenville became the Prime Minister of England. This is the picture of George Grenville on your screen, to the left of your screen. George Grenville, Prime Minister George Grenville. So he was a very strict Prime Minister of England, and he knew that smuggling was going on. You remember the salutary neglect. Goods were being manufactured clandestinely in the 13 colonies and being smuggled into England, like bicycles, hardware, machinery. So he knew this was going on. And what he did is he introduced what is called the Sugar Act, which replaced the Molasses Act. Now, what is Molasses Act? If you recall, Molasses Act, according to Molasses Act, American distillers had to pay 6 pence per duty gallon if they bought molasses from the French West Indies, right? And what were the American distillers doing? They, instead of paying the 6 pence duty, they used to buy molasses from the French West Indies. They used to extract rum, and they used to smuggle rum on other ships into the 13 colonies, on French, Spanish, and Dutch ships. So they were not paying the 6 pence per duty gallon, right? And George Grenville's government came to know about this. These people are smuggling rum into the 13 colonies from the French West Indies without buying molasses, without paying these taxes, this 6 pence duty gallon. Now, what the British government did is, of George Grenville, they removed the Molasses Act. They replaced the Molasses Act with a new act called the Sugar Act. According to the Sugar Act, if the American distiller, if he buys molasses from the British West Indies or the French West Indies or even the Spanish West Indies, let him buy molasses from any part of the West Indies, doesn't matter. Let the American distiller pay a uniform duty of 3 pence per gallon. They have to pay uniformly 3 pence per gallon. Did you understand? What was the purpose of this Sugar Act of 1764? This was to raise resources locally. Okay, you see, to maintain a British army there. In the 13 colonies, Britain had kept an army. Why had they kept an army, a British army in the 13 colonies? This is for 2 reasons. One, if the French attack any of the 13 colonies, even though France was defeated in the 7 Years' War, you have a sizable number of French living in Canada and New Orleans. In case the French attack, you require the British army to fight against the French. And secondly, to give protection to the people of the 13 colonies from from the Red Indians. So for these two reasons, a British army had been stationed there. What was the cost of maintaining the British army on the British exchequer? 3.5 lakh pound per annum. Every year, the British government used to spend 3.5 lakh pound per annum to maintain the British army in the 13 colonies. Now, the British government's thought, why should we pay for the cost of the British army stationed in the 13 colonies? Let the people of the 13 colonies themselves pay. So the idea behind the Sugar Act was to raise additional resources locally, that is in the 13 colonies, to pay for the maintenance of the British army in the 13 colonies. Did you understand? Sugar Act. Did you understand Sugar Act? Yashi, please understand, it is there in the textbook. You listen to the lecture again, a recorded version, maybe one or two times, then you go and read the textbook, then you'll easily understand. So PPTs are meant to be in the form of bullet points. I have, of course, given you sentences here and there. Mostly it is sentences. But wherever I have to explain to you, try to understand the explanation, right? Clear? Now look here. Sugar Act, all of you clear? So whether the American distiller buys molasses from the British West Indies or the French West Indies, he has to pay a uniform duty of 3 pence per gallon. This is called Sugar Act. So I have explained to you Currency Act, I have explained to you Sugar Act. Now let me come to the Stamp Act. Again, this was an act introduced, Stamp Act was introduced during the period of George Grenville. Now let me explain to you what is Stamp Act. Yeah, you can read Veninder. You can read Baiju's World History book. It is very nicely conceived, nicely presented. You can definitely read that. Now let us come to Stamp Act. Understand Stamp Act. Now, what was the Stamp Act, and what was this whole problem about the Stamp Act in the 13 colonies? Now, what is Stamp Act? Let us understand this. What was this so-called Stamp Act? Stamp Act is nothing but revenue stamps. Revenue stamps. Now, what are revenue stamps? Let us say, let me take a hypothetical example. Let's say you want to get your driving license. Okay, you want to get your driving license, DL, for your two-wheeler or four-wheeler. So what do? You go to the Regional Transport Office, RTO. And what do you do there? You inquire with the clerk there. What is the procedure to get a license? And he or she sitting at the counter will tell you, sir, you pay, let us say, you pay 200 rupees as stamp paper. Okay, you have to buy stamp papers worth 200 rupees. And then you're supposed to fill up this form. Okay, once you fill up this form, you append or fix the stamp, paste the stamp here on the application, and you give the application. We'll process your application and we'll call you for a test, driving test or whatever. And if you pass the driving test, you will get your license in about 10 days. So what do? You fill up the application form, you pay 200 rupees at the counter, you buy some stamps, revenue stamps, and then you append or you fix you paste that revenue stamp on that application, and you present that application at the counter. This is one way of earning revenue for the government, money for the government, revenue stamps. And in England, please understand, revenue stamps were used for various purposes. For example, on bills, licenses, documents, legal documents, okay, wills, I said wills, on wills, licenses, legal documents, revenue stamps were used by the British government, and it was a convenient form of earning money or revenue for the British government. Now, Grenville's government, George Grenville's government, imposed the Stamp Act on the people of the 13 colonies. Did you understand? Stamp Act. The Stamp Act was only applicable within England. Now, the British Parliament has extended the Stamp Act to the people of the 13 colonies. Now, please understand, Stamp Act was an internal tax for the first time imposed by the British Parliament. The Navigation Acts till now were external in nature. Navigation Acts I have just now discussed, 1650, 1651, etc. Navigation Acts, please understand, did not affect each and every section of the people of the 13 colonies. It only impacted the merchants or the traders, isn't it? Only the merchants or the traders of the 13 colonies were adversely affected by the Navigation Acts. Whereas the Stamp Act, which was extended to the 13 colonies, would impact each and every member of the people of the 13 colonies, poor and rich alike. right? So even a poor person, if he wants to make a license, he has to pay revenue stamps, money for the revenue stamps, and then it'll reduce his savings. Therefore, what was the reaction within the 13 colonies? What was the reaction? There was a hue and a cry. There was a hue and a cry within the 13 colonies. You have lawyers, understand this, lawyers, journalists, they they wrote against the Stamp Act in the newspapers, right? Newspapers condemned the Stamp Act. Then we have people collecting the revenue stamps. They all collected the revenue stamps in the 13 colonies and they set fire to them and they made bonfires out of it. Then we have a lawyer called Patrick Henry. So he was a lawyer, Patrick Henry from Virginia, right? He was a lawyer from Virginia. In the Virginian Parliament, in the state legislature of Virginia, he gave a speech questioning the right of the British Parliament to tax the people of Virginia. What right does the British Parliament have to tax the people of Virginia through the Stamp Act? Then we have merchants, traders. They passed what is called non-importation agreement. Non-importation agreement. What is this non-importation agreement? They said they will not import anything from England. We are not going to import anything from England, nor are we going to export anything to England from the 13 colonies. So we are not going to buy anything from England, neither are we going to sell anything to England. That is called non-importation agreement. And please understand, the idea of Swadeshi comes from here. You study modern India, you study Indian national movement, freedom struggle. We have the concept of Swadeshi, no, as opposed to Videshi. We will not accept any foreign goods. We'll only use the local goods. Swadeshi movement you study as part of modern India. The extremist leaders, Lal Bal Pal and others, took the idea of Swadeshi from here because you understand the American traders and merchants wanted to put pressure on the British government by hurting the economy of Britain. So they said, we will not import anything from England, neither are we going to sell anything to England. That is called non-importation agreement. Did you understand? Further, we have a radical group which was created called Sons of Liberty. A radical group called Sons of Liberty was established, right? And you have a leader called Samuel Adams. Samuel Adams. So he gave fiery speeches, okay, opposing the Stamp Act. And a man called James Otis, understand this? James Otis came up with a slogan. What's the slogan he came up with? No taxation without representation. No taxation without representation. What is the meaning of this? The meaning of this is none of the 13 colonies are sending a representative to represent them in the British Parliament. We are not sending any MP to the British Parliament. Therefore, how can the British Parliament tax the people of the 13 colonies? That is the slogan, no taxation without representation. For the first time, please understand, the Stamp Act led to the Stamp Act Congress. 30 out of the 13 colonies, 9 colonies participated in the so-called Stamp Act Congress at New York. Now, one more thing is you had riots breaking out in various parts of the 13 colonies, in Philadelphia, in Boston, Virginia. Riots broke out. People opposed the Stamp Act and they made bonfires and burned them. And 9 out of the 13 colonies for the first time joined together in the so-called Stamp Act Congress. And this Stamp Act Congress opposed the Stamp Act. They said only our own state legislatures or parliaments can make law for us because we have elected those members and they only can make law for us, not the British Parliament. Now, what was the reaction to the Stamp Act riots and Stamp Act Congress in England? The king was, of course, George III, and he was shocked and angered with the reaction to the Stamp Act in the 13 colonies. He was very angry. But then we had some liberal politicians like Edmund Burke, Pitt the Younger, no, Edmund Burke, Pitt the Younger, who later became Prime Minister of England, Pitt the Younger. So these uh, Edmund Burke, Burke, these liberal politicians said what the people of the 13 colonies are saying is right. They are not sending any MP or representative to the British Parliament. Therefore, the British Parliament has no right to tax them. So ultimately, how did the Stamp Act Congress, Stamp Act problem come to an end? You see, you have the British merchants putting pressure on the British Parliament because nobody was buying anything from them. No trader from the 13 colonies was buying anything from the British trader or merchant. It was hurting the British economy as well as the profits of the British traders. So, therefore, they in turn put pressure on the British Parliament and told them to repeal the Stamp Act. They said, "Sir, we are getting affected adversely. You take back the Stamp Act." And the British Parliament, going down to the pressure exerted by the British merchants and traders, repealed the Stamp Act. They took back the Stamp Act. Okay, so this is called Stamp Act problem. Did you understand? All of you clear? Hello. So you can see 9 out of the 13 colonies met in a congress, in a meeting. This is called Stamp Act Congress. Okay, and they passed a resolution stating that only their own parliaments or state legislatures can pass laws for them, not the British Parliament, because they are not sending any representative to the British Parliament. And James Otis came up with a slogan. I'll show you some pictures on your screen. You see the Stamp Act. These are the Stamp Act riots, stamp riots, which took place in various parts of the 13 colonies. This is the Stamp Act Congress, where 9 out of the 13 colonies met together to oppose the Stamp Act. And then James Otis came up with this slogan: "No taxation without representation." Right? Now, what was the idea behind the Stamp Act? To raise resources locally, to maintain the British Army. The British government wanted to, raise 3.50 lakh pound per annum so that the people of the 13 colonies themselves can meet the cost of maintaining the British Army. So one of the ideas behind the Sugar Act and also the Stamp Act was that. Did you understand, all of you? Yeah. So 9 out of the 13 colonies met together in the Stamp Act Congress. So, however, after all this problem, after the Stamp Act was repealed, we have a person called Marquis of Rockingham. He was an MP in the British Parliament. His name was Marquis of Rockingham, an MP. He proposed the Declaratory Act, Rockingham. What is this Declaratory Act? Declaratory Act is he told on the floor of the British Parliament that British Parliament has every right to tax the people of the 13 colonies. So the King George III dismissed Rockingham, and the Stamp Act problem diffused. But anyway, this was a victory. This was they had, for the first time, they defied the British Parliament and the British government, the 9 colonies out of the 13, and they had won the debate as regards the Stamp Act, whether the Stamp Act should be accepted or rejected. And that put so much of pressure on the British government that the British government had repealed the Stamp Act or taken back the Stamp Act. And this was a psychological boost and a victory to the people of the 13 colonies. And in future, they showed further defiance whenever the British imposed such unjust laws upon them. Right? This is the measures of George Grenville, Sugar Act, Stamp Act. We'll come back here. I'll move on. Charles Townshend measures. Now, another reason for the outbreak of the revolution, Charles Townshend's measures. Understand this, very simple. All of you, are you clear till here? Are you clear till here? This is only about understanding. Declaratory Act is that Marquis of Rockingham, an MP, declared that the British Parliament has every right to tax the people of the 13 colonies. That is called Declaratory Act. But then the King George III dismissed Marquis of Rockingham. Okay, that is called Declaratory Act. Now, let me explain to you Charles Townshend's measures. What are the measures taken by this so-called Charles Townshend? Now, look here. Understand this? Very simple. In the year 1767, the British Parliament, the House of Commons. So, as you all know, you have two houses in the British Parliament: the House of Commons, which is the lower house, and the House of Lords, which is the upper house. So, the House of Commons, the lower house of the British Parliament, reduced the land tax payable by the people of England. So, what did it do? It reduced the land tax payable by the people of England. Now, to make up this deficit, Charles Townshend was the Chancellor of the Exchequer. Chancellor of the Exchequer. So the finance minister in England is called Chancellor of the Exchequer. Chancellor of the Exchequer. What is his name? Charles Townshend. So right? So I repeat, the British House of Commons in 1767 reduced the land tax payable by the people of England. Now, uh, that much amount of money in the form of land tax, which would have otherwise come into the treasury, was now not coming because the land tax has been reduced by the House of Commons. To make up the deficit or shortage, we have Charles Townshend, the Chancellor of the Exchequer or Finance Minister. He imposed custom duties on five products payable by the people of the 13 colonies. Right? So, paper, paint, glass, lead, and tea. So, people of the 13 colonies have to pay custom duties on these five products. Right? After passing this law, he died. Charles Townshend died. The Chancellor of the Exchequer died. Right? Now, what happened? Again, what was the reaction in the 13 colonies? In the 13 colonies, again, there was a hue and a cry. They opposed the uh, Townshend. This is called Townshend's measures, Townshend's Act. Totally, there were five acts passed. You don't need to remember those acts. Don't worry about it. I have given you the explanation in an adjoining page with a yellow background. What are these Townshend duties? So there are five acts which were part of these Townshend acts. Okay. Most important is this. He imposed custom duties payable by the people of the 13 colonies on these five products. And after passing these acts, he died. The reaction in the colony was again aggressive. You have newspapers, lawyers, journalists criticizing the Townshend duties. We have merchants passing non-importation agreement. They said we will not import anything from England, neither are we going to export anything to England. And they put pressure on the British government, and they wanted to hurt the British economy by not importing or exporting to or from England. Right. So the merchants passed non-importation agreement, and you have people telling the British government that already you have imposed these navigation acts, trade laws on upon us, and you're earning a lot of profit. Why should we pay additional taxes on these five products? And they put so much of pressure. They began to put pressure on the British government. And you have a ship called Liberty. You see, you have a British ship called Liberty, which came to Rhode Island in 1769 to collect these taxes on these five products: paper, paint, glass, and lead and tea. Now, the people of Rhode Island burned the ship. They set fire to the ship. In other words, Charles Townshend fanned the flames of liberty. He fanned the flames of liberty. Did you understand? Charles Townshend's measures. So the whole idea, please understand, the whole idea behind the Townshend duties was to raise resources locally, raise resources within the 13 colonies, okay, to pay for the salaries of judges and governors. I told you there were 13 governors in the 13 colonies, one each. Salaries for the governors and judges he thought he can raise it locally. So the idea was to raise additional resources locally to pay for the salaries of judges and governors. But in the end, what happened? That that ship called Liberty, a revenue ship, it came to Rhode Island to collect the taxes. It was burned by the people of Rhode Island. And the British, to impose the Townshend duties, increased the number of troops at Boston. You have a state called Massachusetts. Massachusetts was a state, one of the states in of the 13 colonies, and the capital of Massachusetts was Boston. So, and there was a customs house in Boston. So the British government increased the number of troops at Boston in order to force the people of the 13 colonies to pay taxes. And that led to so-called Boston Massacre, which I'll discuss in some time. Okay, are you clear about Charles Townshend's measures? The explanation is here on your screen. You see, these are the five acts, as part of the Townshend duties. Charles Townshend was the Chancellor of the Exchequer, the Finance Minister of England, and he passed the Townshend Acts, the Revenue Act, the Indemnity Act, the Commissioners of Customs Act, Vice Admiralty Court, and New York Restraining Act. Don't need to remember this. Just remember Charles Townshend's measures. These are the measures taken by him. The idea was to only raise resources locally to pay for the salaries of governors and judges. And to impose and to collect these taxes, the British increased the number of troops at Boston. That led to the Boston Massacre of 1770. We'll come to that in some time. I'll come to that. Boston Massacre, I'm yet to come. Are you there with me? This is Charles Townshend measures. Next point we go is Lord North's responsibility and the Boston Massacre. Uh, Now people defied paying taxes on those five products. Ramandeep, did you understand? He wanted to raise additional resources because the land tax in England had been reduced. But people in the 13 colonies refused to pay taxes on those five products. And they burned that ship called Liberty at Rhode Island. Now let us come to the next point. Lord North's responsibility and Boston Massacre. Now, who was Lord North? Lord North became the Prime Minister of England. So in 1770, he is Lord North on your screen. So he became the Prime Minister. He was Lord North, Prime Minister of England, and King was George III. King was George III. Now, what is this Boston Massacre? That is, I try to understand this. What is this Boston Massacre? Now, Lord North, the Prime Minister, understood that the people of the 13 colonies are very angry with the Townshend duties, Townshend measures. No, that is those five, the custom duties imposed on those five products. So he knew about it. People are very angry. So what did Lord North do? Lord North repealed the custom duties payable on the first four products. So paper, paint, glass, lead, and tea. These are the five products over which custom duties had to be payable by the people of the 13 colonies. Lord North knew people were very angry about the custom duties which they were supposed to pay on these five products. So what did Lord North do? Lord North repealed the custom duties payable on those first four products. So he told the people of the 13 colonies, you don't need to pay custom duties on those four products, the first four products. But he retained the custom duties on tea. Again, there was a hue and a cry in the 13 colonies. The people of the 13 colonies said, why are you keeping the custom duties only on tea? You have repealed the custom duties on the first four products. You repeal that on tea also. You take back the custom duties on tea also, right? And to impose the custom duties on tea, you have the British Army, the British government increasing the number of troops at Boston. That led to the so-called Boston Massacre. Let me explain to you now what is Boston Massacre. You see, you have a state called Massachusetts, and the capital of Massachusetts was Boston. So Boston was the capital of the state of Massachusetts. At Boston, there was a customs house. There was a customs office. Okay, there was a customs office. Godown was there where the British used to store goods, and you also have a customs office there. And British soldiers used to man the customs office. Youngsters like you people, British soldiers, hot-blooded young British soldiers used to guard the customs office. Then what used to happen frequently is American young boys, mischievous boys, young boys used to, when they were passing the customs office, they will start teasing the British soldiers. After all, British soldiers are foreigners on the soil of the 13 colonies. So youngsters, young American boys will tease the British soldiers. They will throw snowballs at them, snowflakes at them, and tease them in various ways. And frequent brawls used to break out. Frequent fighting would break out between, between the British soldier, who is also a young boy, and the American youths. Now, what happened is there was one British soldier guarding the customs office at Boston, and you have American boys coming and teasing this fellow, and they began to throw snowballs at this British soldier. The British soldier called his friends, his colleagues, and so they also came with their rifles. And what happened is one of the British soldiers fired at the crowd. He opened fire at these American boys, and other British soldiers joined him in the firing. You can see here on your screen, British soldiers are firing at the American boys who called themselves as patriots. And these American youngsters were opposing the number of troops, the British troops, whose number has been increased in Boston. Why had the British government increased the number of troops at Boston? To impose the custom duties, the Townshend duties, so that they can collect the taxes effectively. Now, when the British soldiers opened fire, five people were killed. You see here, five people were killed. Five people were killed in the crowd and 3 were injured. That's why I've written 5:3. 5 people were killed. So 5 were killed and 3 were injured. You don't need to remember the names of these 5 people killed. This is considered to be the first casualty in the American War of Independence. So 5 people were killed, 3 were injured. In the next day's newspaper, there was a bold headline, a bold caption: Boston Massacre. Now, what's a massacre? Massacre is where hundreds of people are killed. Like, for example, Jallianwala Bagh massacre, right? Jallianwala Bagh massacre, where hundreds of people were killed. Here, only 5 were killed and 3 were injured. But in the next day's newspaper, there was a bold headline called Boston Massacre. What were the American patriots trying to do? They were trying to instigate the people of Boston and the other states to rise in revolt against the British. So this is the Boston Massacre which took place. Did you understand? So Lord North repealed the custom duties payable by the people of the 13 colonies on the first 4 products, and he retained that on tea, and people began to oppose that, and that resulted in the Boston Massacre. Clear? Yeah, they called it massacre only to instigate others to oppose the British rule. Did you understand? Okay. Then I move on. So the explanation is here. You see, I had put a yellow background, but this is in green. Doesn't matter. You see here, these are the first casualties in the American War of Independence. Crispus Attucks, Patrick Carr, Samuel Gray, Samuel Maverick, and James Caldwell. They died. You don't need to remember these names. Just know what happened at Boston and how this Boston massacre happened. That is enough. We move on. The immediate cause for the outbreak of the revolution, the Boston Tea Party. Understand this: Boston Tea Party, which is considered to be the immediate cause for the outbreak of the American Revolution. Let us understand now what is Boston Tea Party. Now look here, we have the English East India Company, English EIC, East India Company, which went on to rule India also. This company, the English East India Company, was the major supplier of tea to Europe and other parts of the world. So it was the major supplier of tea to Europe and other parts of the world. And the English East India Company was in financial doldrums. It was in financial trouble. It was in financial trouble during those days. And Lord North's government, Lord North was the Prime Minister of England. So Lord North's government wanted to favor the company, right? Wanted to benefit the company. So what did the government of Lord North do? They passed the Tea Act. They passed the Tea Act of 1773. What is this Tea Act of 1773? Under this Tea Act of 1773, the East India Company can take tea, which was there in its godowns. So it had a huge consignment of tea stored in its godowns. So under the Tea Act of 1773, the East India Company can take the tea which was stored in its godowns on its own ships to the 13 colonies and directly sell it to the American traders, American people. This was the Tea Act of 1773. Now, please understand what was the tea drunk by the people of the 13 colonies. You have American tea merchants who used to smuggle Dutch tea. They used to smuggle tea from Netherlands or from Holland, from the Dutch. And so they used to smuggle Dutch tea into the 13 colonies. And the American tea merchants used to make quite a lot of profits from that. Right now, the Tea Act would have benefited the people of the 13 colonies, because if the East India Company sells the tea directly to the people of the 13 colonies, they'll get the tea at a very cheap rate. It would benefit the people of the 13 colonies. But then the American tea merchants would be adversely affected, because everybody will start buying the British tea and not the Dutch tea. So the American tea traders did not want East India Company to sell its tea in the 13 colonies. Now what happened is, you have three ships of the East India Company laden with 90,000 pounds of tea. So this was worth 90,000 pounds in about 348 boxes or chests, boxes or chests. So 348 boxes or chests of tea on three ships came to Boston, and the governor of Massachusetts wanted to get the tea unloaded. And the people of Boston, that is the tea merchants of Boston, were equally determined to see that these tea of the East India Company is not unloaded into Boston Harbor. So when during this confusion, what happened is one of the members of the Sons of Liberty by name Samuel Adams. Samuel Adams was a member of this extremist group called Sons of Liberty. Right. So Samuel Adams, along with a few of his supporters, they disguise themselves as Mohawks, that is Red Indians. Mohawk is another word for Red Indians. So they disguised themselves as Red Indians, right? They boarded those ships and dumped all those 348 boxes of tea into the ocean. And this particular episode is called Boston Tea Party. Did you understand? Boston Tea Party. So I repeat, East India Company, East India Company um, um, was the major supplier of tea to Europe and other parts of the world. And in 1773, it found itself in a lot of financial problems. And Lord North's government wanted to favor the East India Company. And therefore, it passed the Tea Act of 1773, under which it authorized the East India Company to take the tea in its godowns on its own ships directly to the 13 colonies and sell it to the American people. But then it would have affected the profits of the American tea traders who used to smuggle Dutch tea into the 13 colonies and sell it. So when three ships of the East India Company came to Boston Harbor and it was waiting for the tea boxes to be unloaded, Samuel Adams and his men got onto those ships and they dumped all the tea boxes into the ocean. And that particular episode is called Boston Tea Party, which is the immediate reason for the outbreak of the American Revolution. Clear? Right? Can I move on? The details are here. You see, please go through these details and you'll get the missing link in case you're, yeah, 348 boxes of tea thrown into the ocean, and that's called Boston Tea Party, right? So don't think there was a party going on. This was basically boxes dumped into the ocean, and that is called Boston Tea Party. Okay, now let us look at the reaction of the British government to the so-called Boston Tea Party. Understand this. Please understand this. Very simple. We have the British government, the British Parliament passing the so-called coercive acts. You see here the coercive acts. What are these coercive acts? Very simple. Number one, the Boston port was closed. The Boston port was closed until restitution was paid for the lost tea, until compensation was paid for the lost tea. The British traders have lost 90,000 pounds worth of tea. So they expected the people of the 13 colonies, the government of the 13 colonies, to pay compensation for that loss. So until then, the Boston port would be closed. That is number one. Number two, town meetings were forbidden. There will be no town meetings allowed in Boston. That is number two. Number three, the locally elected council, that is the state parliament, was abolished, and the British nominated an alternative council. So the locally elected state parliament was abolished, and you have one nominated by the British, which comes into play. Number four, exemplary powers, that is, enormous powers were given to a British army general. His name was Thomas Gage. So he was given exemplary powers by the British Parliament, Thomas Gage. That is number four. Number five, um, those British officials who were charged of capital offences, that is death sentence. So during this Boston massacre, British soldiers had fired at the unarmed crowd. So that amounted to death sentence. Okay, so those British officials who were charged of capital offences, that is death sentence, would be tried not in Massachusetts but in some other British colony, or they would be tried in England. These are called the coercive acts. And one more point is we have something called the what do you call Quartering Act. another part of this coercive act is called Quartering Act. What is this Quartering Act? Let me explain to you. Quartering Act is this. Now, when British soldiers, I told you, you have a British army in the 13 colonies. Now, British soldiers, if they are passing by a particular town or a city in the 13 colonies, they used to stay in the open ground. So what will the army soldiers do? They will fix up a tent and they will live inside the tent. Okay, if they have to take rest, because the British army is marching from one part of the 13th colony into another part, and they want to take rest. They will settle down in an open ground by fixing tents. Under the Quartering Act, you have the British Parliament giving the right to the British Army in the 13 colonies to claim right of residence in a building which was not used. Let's say there's a hospital, okay, and that hospital building is there. No patients are there. It is not being used. Let's say there's a school or a college, and that school or college is defunct. Nobody is using that school or college building. Now, the British Army can stay in those buildings, public buildings, instead of staying in the open ground, inside tents. And the people of that area where the British Army is staying have to pay for the boarding and lodging facilities. That's called Quartering Act. Did you understand? For example, if a British Army is passing in my locality, okay, where I'm staying, where I have my own house, and in that locality there's a khali, there's a spare school or a college building or a hospital which is not being used. They can stay in those hospital buildings or schools or colleges, and people like me who are living in that area and others have to pay for the boarding and lodging facilities, that is food and other essentials required by the soldiers. This is called Quartering Act. And so these are all known as coercive acts which were passed by the British Parliament. Did you understand, all of you? Fifth point, okay, again I'll repeat. What happened? All the tea was dumped into the ocean. So the British Parliament has retaliation, passed the coercive acts. Under this coercive acts, number one, Boston port was closed until compensation was paid to the lost tea. That is number one. Number two, town meetings in Boston were forbidden. Number three, the locally elected council, that is state parliament, was abolished, and one nominated by the British was brought into existence. That is number three. Number four, exemplary powers were given to the British general called Thomas Gage. So he got huge amount of power. He can do whatever he wants. The British Army general called Thomas Gage. Fifth, you have those British officials who were charged of capital offences or death sentence will be tried in a court of law, not in Massachusetts but in some other colony. Boston massacre happened in the state of Massachusetts, and Boston was the capital of Massachusetts. Therefore, those soldiers, British soldiers accused of capital offences, will be tried in some other state, not in Massachusetts, or they will be sent to England to be tried. And lastly, the Quartering Act, which gave the right to the British Army to station itself free of cost in any public building not used in any of the 13 colonies, and the maintenance, the boarding lodging facilities for those soldiers will be met by the people of that locality or that area. These are called coercive acts. Are you there with me? So this way the British Parliament was punishing the people of Massachusetts, because this Boston Tea Party happened at Boston, where all the boxes were dumped into the ocean by Samuel Adams and his men, and the British Parliament wanted to take revenge by punishing the people of Massachusetts through these coercive acts. Clear? Got it? Very simple. So then we move on. Nature of colonial administration. Very simple. What is this nature of colonial administration? Obviously, it was a very defective system of administration which was prevalent in the 13 colonies. Who was what was the legislative body which made laws? The local parliament, the state parliament which was existing in each of the 13 colonies. That was the legislative body which made laws. And what was the executive authority? The governor, who was a British appointee. So he was the executive authority, and he was appointed by the British government. Isn't it? And the state parliament was locally elected by the people of that particular colony or state. So obviously there was neither cooperation nor coordination between the governor and the state parliament. And obviously, the administration was bound to be affected adversely in such a circumstances. In such a circumstance, did you understand nature of colonial administration? It was a very defective system of administration. Sweeping powers is exemplary powers. Kartika, lot of powers were given to the British Governor General Thomas Gage. Sweeping powers is that. Exemplary powers, enormous amount of powers. Did you understand nature of colonial administration? Very simple. Then we go to religious and temperamental differences. Religious and temperamental differences. Now let us understand this. What ninth point here? Let us understand religious and temperamental differences. Now, if you put a chart like this, you have the people of the 13 colonies and England. Now you have religious and temperamental differences between the people of the 13 colonies and England. People of the 13 colonies generally were Puritans. Who are Puritans? They are the followers of John Calvin, right? So generally they were Puritans, whereas the people of England adhere to the Anglican Church, the Protestant Church, the Anglican Church of England, right? So generally, the Puritans they had a lot of freedom in with respect to their religious practices, right? So this is number one. Secondly, the people of England are generally even now conservative. They are conservative, bound by customs and traditions. Bound by customs and traditions. Generally, English people have a stiff upper lip, and they are conservative. Like even now, they have the institution of monarchy. People don't like it because the taxpayers' money is going on to maintain the monarch and his family there in England. And if you notice Wimbledon tennis tournament, they all wear white. There was once upon a time there was a tennis player called Andre Agassi, colorful fellow, American tennis player. He used to wear exotic clothes, colorful clothes, perm his hair, color his hair, etc. When he first appeared on the Wimbledon stage, he wore white, and he had a bald palette, and he wore white, and they gave him a standing ovation because he was respecting the tradition of Wimbledon tournament by wearing white. So, which was very unlike Agassi. So, even now, the people of England are bound by customs, traditions, and they're conservative, whereas the people of the 13 colonies were liberal. They were liberal of outlook, very broad-minded, liberal, very free-spirited people, unlike the people of England. Further, apart from these religious and temperamental differences, we have the problem of communication between the 13 colonies and mother country England. So you have transport and communication problem. What was the distance between England and the 13 colonies? 5,000 kilometers of Atlantic Ocean. And those days you had no computers, no telegraph, no telephone, no satellites, right? So it would take 3 months minimum for a message to reach the 13 colonies from England, right? And equal amount of for the reply. Okay, if somebody says, "How are you?" To somebody in the 13 colonies, for him to reply that message, it will take him 3 months. So it was very difficult for England during those days to control effectively the 13 colonies because of the transport and communication problems. The distance made it very difficult. Okay, so this is religious and temperamental differences. And lastly, self-sufficiency. I told you this. The early settlers, that is the people who had gone to the 13 colonies, initially found a lot of difficulty. They had to fight against nature, fight against the Red Indians, and they were dependent upon the mother country for their essentials, food and other basic essentials. They were dependent upon the mother country. But over a period of time, or during the course of time, they became self-sufficient. Whatever they wanted, they began to grow there in the 13 colonies, or they began to manufacture itself in the 13 colonies. Schools, colleges, universities, banks, etc., came into existence. Factories all came into existence in the 13 colonies, and slowly they became self-sufficient, and their dependence upon the mother country drastically reduced. But still, they allowed the British Parliament to make laws, trade laws upon them, because they were afraid of a possible French attack upon them, who were there in the northern parts of America. But once the French were defeated in the Seven Years' War, the French threat also disappeared. And the people of the 13 colonies also did not want England to boss over them. So these are the 10 points. the developments which happened in between 1763 and 83. Are you there with me, all of you? Ankita, Anglican Church is the church established by King Henry VIII. I have told you yesterday's class. All of you, are you clear? Can I move on? Okay, now look here. So the Boston Tea Party, that is dumping all those 348 boxes into the ocean, precipitated the crisis. That is the beginning of the revolution, outbreak of the revolution. So the Boston Tea Party precipitated the crisis. What did the government do? The British Parliament do? It passed the Coercive Acts, wherein the Boston port was closed, which meant unemployment. In 1774, we have a meeting which took place at Philadelphia. This is called the first colonial Congress or Continental Congress. This is the first Continental Congress which met at Philadelphia, New Jersey. And in this first Continental Congress, which took place at Philadelphia in 1774, out of the 13 colonies, 12 colonies were represented. Only Georgia did not send delegates to the first Continental Congress. So out of the 13 colonies, 12 states sent delegates. Only Georgia did not send. Why is the question? Why did not Georgia send a delegate representing it to the first Continental Congress? Let's understand that. You see, in Georgia there was a revolt of the Creeks. You have a group of people called the Creeks. Okay, so the Creeks were revolting against the government of Georgia. And the government of Georgia, the people of Georgia, wanted the British army to suppress this Creek revolt. So, British army's help was necessary to put down the revolt of the Creeks. And therefore, Georgia did not send any delegate to the First Continental Congress. Did you understand? Now, what happened in this First Continental Congress? The Congress adopted an agreement. It passed an agreement stating that they are not going to import anything from England. Neither are they going to export anything to England. So this is non-importation agreement. They said we will not import anything from England, nor are we going to sell anything to England. Then the first continental, you see here, this is the picture of the first Continental Congress. Then the Congress passed a declaration of rights, stating that only their own parliament, state parliaments can tax them, not the British Parliament, because they are not sending any representative to the British Parliament. Therefore, the British Parliament has no right to tax them. Only their own state parliaments can tax them. So they drew up a declaration of rights stating that the British Parliament has no right to tax them. And they also told the British Parliament and the King that they are loyal subjects of the British Crown. They said we are all loyal subjects of the British Crown. We only have one request: whatever laws have been imposed upon them by the British Parliament should be repealed. Whatever laws have been passed by the British Parliament since 1765 should be repealed, taken back. Right? So, whatever laws had been passed by the British Parliament and imposed upon the people of the 13 colonies since 1765 should be repealed or taken back. Lord North's government refused to do any of this. Okay? And that is the beginning of the revolution. The first shots were fired at Lexington. You have the British army opening fire at Lexington. So the first gunshots were fired at Lexington, and the first fighting between the British and the colonists, American colonists, people of the 13 colonies, happened at Concord. This is the first Continental Congress. Are you there with me? Once eighth point. Which eighth point you're talking about? Nature of colonial administration. I told you already, Ankita. Defective system of administration. The state parliaments were locally elected by the people of that particular state, and that was the one which made laws. But the governor was a British appointee. He was nominated by the British Parliament, by the British Crown, right? And he generally created hurdles for the state parliaments. So there was neither cooperation nor coordination between the governor and the respective state parliaments. Yeah, the Creeks were a minority within Georgia, Kennedy. Okay, so there was a revolt of the Creeks, and the government of Georgia wanted the British army to put down the revolt of the Creeks. Course of the revolution, Yeah, last point is self-sufficiency. Karthik, self-sufficiency. I told you initially they were dependent upon the mother country for all their essentials. Over a period of time, they became self-sufficient. Whatever they required, they manufactured it in the 13 colonies, or they grew it in the 13 colonies, and their dependence upon the mother country reduced. Right? But then they tolerated Britain making laws upon them, trade laws upon them, because they were afraid of a possible French attack on the 13 colonies. But in the 7 Years' War, that also disappeared. France was defeated. There was no more French threat. And the people of the 13 colonies did not want England also to boss over them. Okay, that's what it is. Did you understand the First Continental Congress? Now, please understand, remember this. They are telling the King of England, we are loyal subjects of the British Crown. You only repeal or take back all those laws passed by the British Parliament upon us since 1765. Lord North's government refused, and that led to the outbreak of the revolution. Now, look here, let us understand Lexington and Concord. I told you the first shots were fired at Lexington, and the first fighting happened at Concord. Let me explain that. Very simple. Understand this. You have this British general called Thomas Gage. He had a plan. What was the plan? The plan was to go from Boston to Lexington. The plan, understand this? The plan was to go from Boston to Lexington. Who were there in Lexington? We had two leaders of the Americans, that is the colonists, Samuel Adams and John Hancock. So the plan was go to Lexington with the army from Boston, arrest Samuel Adams, arrest this Samuel Adams and John Hancock. Okay. Once they are arrested, the British Army would proceed to Concord, where the colonists had stored a lot of gunpowder. So we have a place called Concord, Concord. Lot of gunpowder had been stored by the American revolutionaries. So the plan was to go to Lexington from Boston, arrest these two leaders, the leaders of the Americans, and then from there go to Concord and seize the gunpowder. This was the plan. Now we have fast American horse riders like Paul Revere. So Paul Revere, they came to know, Americans came to know what was the plan of the British General Thomas Gage and his officers. So even before the British Army came to Lexington, you have fast horse riders like Paul Revere. They went ahead of the British Army. They took another route and went ahead, and they informed the American revolutionaries that a British army is coming to fight against us. You get ready. So already you have the Americans, the people of the 13 colonies. They had organized a small army. Okay, so once they came to know that a British army is coming from Boston to Lexington to arrest their leaders, Samuel Adams and John Hancock, the Americans got ready. The people of the 13 colonies, that army got ready. So on the Lexington Highway, that is called Lexington Common. You can see here Lexington Common. That is the highway from Boston to Lexington. So you have, as the British Army was marching left and right and coming towards Lexington, you have fighting breaking out, right? So 77 American militiamen, just 77 American soldiers, militia, they confronted the British Army, right? And the British fired shots, gunshots for the first time, and fighting broke out. Now, what happened in this fighting? The very few American soldiers, or the soldiers of the colonists, were killed, whereas the British suffered huge casualties. 73 dead. British lost 73 soldiers. 174 were wounded, and about 26 were missing. And the British realized, my God, we cannot take these Americans lightly. Right? This is Lexington and Concord. First shots were fired at Lexington, and the first fighting happened at Concord, and they were able to repel the British Army towards Boston. This is Lexington and Concord. Did you understand? And this is called Boston Tea Party. Where it is put in a very humorous manner. I would say, Ramandeep, whatever happened at Boston, where all the boxes were dumped into the ocean. Okay. Now look here. Okay. Oh my God. I have run out of time. Okay. Okay. My God. 8 o'clock is the class. You have any webinar? You have any webinar? Hello, do you have any webinar? Just give me 5 minutes extra. Can you give me 5 minutes extra? Just 5 minutes. Tarun, just hold on. Just 5 minutes. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Just hold on. So Lexington and Concord, you have understood. Now let us understand British attacks on coastal towns. British attacks on coastal towns. Now understand this. You see, these are the 13 colonies. Imagine this. These are the 13 colonies, okay, on the eastern Atlantic seacoast of North America. These are the northern colonies, these are the middle colonies, and these are the southern colonies. Now, if I might ask you, what was the economy of the southern colonies? It was a plantation economy. And who were working on these plantations? Slaves were working. What did they grow? They grew cotton, sugarcane, etc. Whereas the north and middle colonies were highly industrially developed. Factories had come into existence. They were industrially highly developed. They were industrialized, in other words. When the American War of Independence began, when the American Revolution began, when the fighting began, what you need to understand is only the middle and the northern colonies were fighting against the British. The southern colonies were not fighting. Only the middle and the northern colonies were fighting against the British. The question is, why weren't the southern colonies fighting against the British? The reason is, please understand, they had a plantation economy. Whatever was grown in the southern colonies, that is from Virginia to Georgia, whatever was grown in the southern colonies, all was sold in England. So England was the main market for the plantation economy of the southern colonies. Everything was bought by England. So the southerners, the southern colonies thought that if we fight against the British will not buy anything from us and it will be a loss for us. Okay, that's why initially the southern colonies did not participate in the American War of Independence, the American Revolution. But later what happened? The British bombed some certain areas in the southern colonies. They bombed clandestinely. They bombed, and the British ships bombarded these towns. Norfolk, okay, then Massachusetts, then Falmouth. So, sorry, this is not in the southern colonies. They bombed Norfolk, Massachusetts, and Falmouth. Those days, please understand, houses and offices, etc., were made of wood. So when British through their ships bombarded these towns, the whole town went up in flames. You have houses and offices, etc., getting burnt. And ruthlessly, the British were very, very ruthless in trying to put down the Americans, in trying to put down the people of the 13 colonies. And George Washington was very shocked because George Washington had been appointed as the commander of the colonial forces. He was very shocked. At the same time, the British were telling the slaves in the 13 colonies, if you support us, we will give you your freedom. So there was a possibility of a slave insurrection, a slave revolt. The plantation owners in the southern colonies were dependent upon the slave laborers to work on those plantations. What are the British telling the slaves, the African slaves? You support the British, and we will give you freedom after we defeat the revolutionaries. So the plantation owners became very scared because if the slaves revolt against them, then it will be problems for them because they were dependent upon slave labor. So the southern states also decided to join the American War of Independence. Did you understand? All of you, did you understand? So initially they did not join because they were dependent on England for the marketing of their goods. But once the British bombarded these towns like Norfolk, Massachusetts, and Falmouth, and ruthlessly were trying to defeat the colonists, at the same time they were trying to instigate the slaves against the revolutionaries, telling them that they will get freedom if they support the British. The people of the people of the southern colonies decided to join the War of Independence. Okay, I stop here because I have run out of time. We'll complete this chapter tomorrow. And we will go to the next chapter, a very interesting chapter, a topic, French Revolution. I'll finish this topic tomorrow. I'll finish it in about 10-15 minutes. I should finish, and we can start with the French Revolution tomorrow. Thank you very much. Okay, please revise your PPTs. Revise your PPTs within 24 hours. try to do the first revision, at least go through the PPTs, recall whatever has been done in the class, and if you can listen to the recorded version, it will be great. It will be sort of a very, very good revision for you. Okay, thank you very much. Have a good night's sleep. We'll meet tomorrow. Thank you very much. Yeah, they were from Africa, Kennedy. They used to be shipped across the Atlantic. I showed you the map also, where I put a map there in the PPTs. Go through that map. Rum was rum and other goods were exchanged for slaves from Africa, and they were distributed. The slaves were sent to South America, to the Central America, and also to Europe and North America. Lexington, Lexington and Concord is, you have Americans having their leaders at Lexington, Samuel Adams and John Hancock. So a plan was made by the British Governor General Thomas Gage. He wanted to take the army from Boston to Lexington, arrest these two leaders, Samuel Adams and John Hancock, and from there, from Lexington, they wanted to go to Concord and seize the gunpowder there, which the Americans had stored. But then Americans came to know about their plan. And then when the British army was marching towards Lexington, fighting broke out. Okay, and the British suffered heavy casualties, and they were, they had to retreat back to Boston. That is called Lexington and Concord. Clear? Okay. So, world history is like a story. It's more about understanding. Okay, so try to understand. And these whatever I'm telling you is enough to write a very good answer. But to be on the safer side, please do read one textbook, any textbook of your choice, so that your preparation is complete, and you get additional points definitely from the textbooks. Okay, thank you very much. Good night. Thank you very much. Good night. I'm logging out.